Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. I know I've been gone for quite a few months now, and you may be asking why that is, and it's because I've been working on this. So you may be asking, what this is. Actually, if you're anything like me and you've watched all of MAAAAX recap videos on iconic teen dramas of the 2010s and 2000s, you're probably not asking what this is. You probably already know what this is because it's just my pathetic attempt to completely plagiarize his format. Yeah, so I decided that I wanted to do a recap video on one of my other all-time favorite series that I've also been watching on a loop basically every couple months since the moment I turned 15, which is Gilmore Girls. So initially I was kind of hesitant to do this kind of plot recap style video on Gilmore Girls because while I love this show, I watch it all the time, it definitely doesn't have like a crazy unhinged plot like something like Pretty Little Liars does. So I was like, is this even gonna be interesting? Because I feel like Gilmore Girls is like, the intrigue about it is more about like the characters and the dialogue rather than the plot itself. But then I decided that I'm just gonna do this video anyway because I love this show and I love discussing it and its characters and everything about it in excruciating detail. And you know, while I'm sure there's some casual fans of Gilmore Girls out there somewhere, I feel like most of the fans of the show are like me in that they're a little bit too obsessed with it and would, I don't know, appreciate something going super in-depth about the series. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I know there's a bunch of recap podcasts out there that do this whole thing better than I ever could, but I'm gonna do it anyway, besties. Another thing I will say is that I think this video could be beneficial. I don't know if that's the right word, but like worth watching for you, even if you're not a fan of Gilmore Girls, even if you haven't watched the show, because like I said earlier about Gilmore Girls fans like myself, is that we're like a little bit too obsessed with the show. We will take every excuse we can get to like make references to it and bring it up in conversation and try and get people in our lives to watch it so they can discuss it with us, like relentlessly try and do that. I'm talking about me, I'm talking about myself, but I know you Gilmore Girlies stands out there, you do that too. Don't lie to me. You gotta admit it to yourself, okay? We're all a little bit annoying. And while I love Gilmore Girls, I think it's like incredibly written, incredibly acted, just incredible all-around show. Obviously, I wouldn't have dedicated a whole wall in my apartment to it if not. Like, I obviously think everyone should watch this show, but the reality is, it's just not gonna be everyone's cup of tea. Like, we gotta accept the fact that a lot of these characters, like, most of what they're doing is just being frustrating and annoying, and like not communicating correctly a lot of the time, which is why I love the show. I think that's super entertaining, frankly. But, you know, not everyone's gonna want to watch 7 seasons of that. So I feel like this video could be helpful to those of you who are not Gilmore Girls fans yourselves, but have hardcore Gilmore Girls stannies in your life who constantly are bringing up the show and want you to watch it and want to discuss it with you. But, you know, you're not a personal big fan of the show. You don't want to watch 7 seasons of these people being annoying, then you can just watch a couple hours of me being annoying instead. So also, I've decided to split this recap into 2, maybe 3 parts. I haven't decided yet, but this video is only going to be covering seasons 1 through 3 of the show. But I think we should get into the plot now, besties. I've been hammering on for way too long. So this show is set in the fictional quaint small town of Stars Hollow, Connecticut, which I've attempted to recreate on my wall here. Also, yes, all these pictures are gonna be like coming off at the edges because I did it by double-sided tape because I'm an idiot. So we start out, like I was saying, in Stars Hollow, Connecticut, where we see Lorelai Gilmore walking down the street to the tune of iconic early 2000s character intro song, There She Goes by The Laws. I don't know if that's that ubiquitous with the early 2000s. I feel like it's probably just in The Parent Trap. But let's not underestimate the widespread impact that the Parent Trap soundtrack has had on my brain. Lorelai, I would describe as like independent, stubborn, a little bit annoying, but like also fast talking, quick wit, cool, sexy, hot mom, MILF girl. Okay, so we see Lorelai walking down the street, and where does she walk into but Luke's diner, who is run by this guy, Luke, who is like the very grumpy, curmudgeonly diner owner who is like the inventor of capsule wardrobe by only wearing this like iconic lumberjack flannel and backwards baseball cap every day. So she sets her coat down and goes up to the counter already holding like a mug in her hand. Like did she walk into the diner with that mug? Anyway, apparently it's bring your own mug day at Luke's, and she goes up to the counter and asks the owner, Luke, obviously, for another cup of coffee. And Luke is like, well, how many does that make today? And she's like, this is my first one. It's like, sure, because Lorelai is a caffeine addict, and Luke doesn't like that because he's a health nut. But he gives Lorelai the coffee anyway, because another big part of Luke's character is that he's in love with Lorelai. Is that a spoiler? I feel like no. I feel like it's very obvious. So he gives the coffee to Lorelai. She sits down. And who is she meeting at Luke's diner but Rory Gilmore, her daughter. Rory is kind of characterized in the show as like Lorelai's little mini-me. So a lot like Lorelai, also addicted to caffeine, also like quick wit, lots of pop culture references, but like a more shy, polite, book smart, Ivy League academic version of her. So after Lorelai and Rory have their little meetup in the diner, we go to the Independence Inn, which is where Lorelai works as the manager of the inn, and we meet her coworkers, Sookie, who's the chef at the end and is like very like manic, accident prone, frantic, kind of flighty, but also like really good chef. Like I really want to eat some of her food. It looks really fancy. And then Michelle, who's like the concierge there, and he is very French. So at the Independence Inn, we learn that Lorelai and Sookie are like best friends basically, and they have this big dream of eventually, going off on their own and starting their own inn together. Then Rory walks into the Independence Inn wearing this sweater, which is every basic white girl's fall outfit inspiration Pinterest board. Not dissing it. I love this sweater. I want this sweater. I tried to recreate it today. So then Rory leaves the Independence Inn to go meet up with her friend Lane so they can walk to school together. Lane is very like cool girl. She loves music, audiophile, a little bit boy obsessed, but she has to like sneak around and hide all her like crazy rock CDs because her mom is like super strict religious. So Rory and Lane are walking to school around Stars Hollow, which is it's very like small town aesthetic, cozy fall vibes, which is I think a big reason why a lot of people love this show. Right now they're like setting up for fall like fairs and stuff. So they're like putting on an event for like a little teen hayride, which Lane of course has to go to because her mom is trying to set her up with like a future Korean doctor or something. Anyway, they're walking down the streets of Stars Hollow and they get to Stars Hollow High. When they're walking into school, they walk right past this mysterious leather jacket boy with very 90s curtain bangs, and he's just like leaning on the pillar and like staring at Rory. He kind of creepy, honestly. He's giving very like Twilight Edward vibes right now. So after Rory and Lane go to school, we head back to the Independence Inn where Lorelai is telling some big news to Sookie. Apparently, Rory got into this super fancy rich girl private prep school called Chilton, and they're super excited about it because Lorelai and Rory have like this big dream of Rory going to Harvard. But then Lorelai opens a letter at her desk, and apparently it's the tuition for Chilton. And Lorelai is looking pretty upset by that because the show really tries to establish her as like poverty girly. Well, not poverty, but like, you know, not rich. Even though she seems like pretty well off to me. But you know what? Whatever. We're just gonna go along with the show's narrative. Say, Lorelai can't afford Chilton's tuition. So she goes to Sookie and she's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do about this. Like, we tried so hard to get Rory into the school and into Harvard, but now I can't afford it. And Sookie's like, well, I think there's a very obvious solution to your problem. But Lorelai, when she hears that, is immediately like, no. She is very adamant about not doing that. So Rory is back at Stars Hollow High. She is packing up her locker. She's talking to Lane and telling Lane how she's super excited that she gets to wear a uniform now because she does not have to spend time picking out outfits every day or whatever, because we have to establish that Rory is not like other girls. But anyway, she is carrying a box of books from her locker down the hall when she literally runs headfirst into someone and is knocked to the floor. And she's like, what the hell, dude? And she makes like some obscure movie reference, and then the guy that she ran into understood it. So then she's like, never mind, I'm not mad at you, I'm actually charmed by you. Yeah, there's a lot of obscure pop culture media references that happen throughout the show. Don't expect me to explain them because I don't understand. So she gets up and looks at the guy she bumped into, and who is it but the guy who was staring at her before when she walked into the school. So apparently his name is Dean, and he is from Chicago and just moved to Stars Hollow. So Rory offers to show him around town. So they walk around Stars Hollow together and have a super cringy conversation where Rory is being like super awkward, shy YN girl. We learn that apparently Rory's full name is Lorelai, and Lorelai named her after herself. And then Dean tells Rory that apparently he has been not only watching her that one day outside of school, but like literally stalking her around town for the past couple weeks. I told y'all he was Edward Twilight coded, okay? Dean says he's looking for a job in town, and Rory tells him to talk to Miss Patty, who's like the local gossip, and she'll know who's hiring. Then apparently Lorelai is running out of time and options to get that tuition bill in, so she has to go and do the thing Sookie suggested, the thing that she, remember, really did not want to do. So she drives up to this huge fancy white ivory mansion, and she knocks on the door, and who answers but her mother, Emily Gilmore. Emily Gilmore, I would describe as, you know, very wealthy, conservative, kind of passive-aggressive, manipulative, but like in a slay girl boss kind of way. Emily opens the door and sees Lorelai and is shocked, and she's like, is it Christmas already? Because apparently Lorelai only shows up to their house on holidays because they clearly have a strained relationship. But Lorelai makes an excuse. She's like, oh, I'm just dropping in from my business class that I have in Hartford. And Emily is like, okay, sure, whatever, yeah. She walks into their like big fancy statue old money mansion and sits down on the couch, and then Richard Gilmore, who is her father and is very also, you know, wealthy, conservative, a little bit aloof, but also kind of like generous grandfather vibes. He comes in. He's also shocked to see Lorelai, of course, because she never comes to their house. And then he's like, oh, I know why you're here. You want money. And she's like, no, I just wanted to see you money. What is that? I've never heard of it. So then Lorelai tells them that Rory got into Chilton, which of course they are very excited about because they are fancy rich people. And they're like, wow, Chilton, that's a private school. It's a very good school. We are very happy that Rory got in. And then Lorelai basically has to admit she needs the money to pay for Chilton. And she's like, it's not for me. It's for Rory, and I will pay you back every cent of the money you give me. So Richard is like, of course, no questions asked, we'll pay for Rory's school. But Emily, she always sees when there's a way to manipulate a situation and weasel what she wants out of it. And she says, sure, Lorelai, we'll pay for Chilton, but on one condition. You and Rory have to come to our house every Friday night and have dinner with us. Because basically, Lorelai never goes and sees her parents and basically keeps Rory out of their lives as well. So this is a way that Emily can ensure that she sees Lorelai and her daughter. And Lorelai's like, okay, fine, Mom, whatever. We'll come to dinner. Then the next day, Lorelai and Rory go and meet up for dinner at Luke's, where they order a bunch of like chili cheese fries and coffee and a bunch of unhealthy food because, again, these two are very much early 2000s, not like other girls. Like one of their 5 personality traits is basically just eating a lot of junk food and never gaining any weight. Lorelai basically tells Rory, hey, tomorrow night we have to go to dinner over at your grandparents' house. Rory is, for some reason unknown to Lorelai at this point, being like super angsty tonight, and she's like, fine, whatever. And Lorelai's like, what's up? Why are you so upset? And Rory is like, well, what if I had plans? You didn't even ask me. And Lorelai is like, well, if you had plans, you would have told me. And Rory's like, I don't tell you everything. And then Lorelai gets upset about that because they have like maybe a little bit too close a relationship. They tell each other everything usually. So Lorelai's like, what is going on? Like, what is bothering you tonight? And then Rory says, I'm not sure if I want to go to Chilton. And this shocks Lorelai. And she's like, what are you even talking about? Like yesterday you were super excited. You just wanted to wear that uniform all the damn time. And she is so fed up with Rory's angsty teenage antics that she just storms out of the diner without eating like any of her food, which is a surprisingly common occurrence throughout the show. Rory follows behind her. They are super grumpily, angsty walking down the street when Miss Patty sees Rory and she's like, hey, Rory, guess what? I found a job for your male friend. And then Lorelai puts the puzzle pieces together. She's like, oh, male friend, huh? This is because of a boy. You met a boy you like, and now you don't want to go to the big fancy school in Hartford. And then Rory's like, no, Mom, I'm super teenage angsty. You'll never understand me, and you don't know what you're talking about. Lorelai's like, I know all about throwing my life away for a boy. I got pregnant at 16, basically. And she's like, I'm pulling the mom card, you're not doing the same, and you're going to Chilton, whether you like it or not. So the next day, Lorelai and Rory are at Friday night dinner with the grandparents, Emily and Richard, and they are still, you know, being super non-talkative and angsty with each other. Drama ensues, as you will see, it always does at these damn Friday night dinners. Emily pulls Lorelai into the kitchen to talk with her, and basically we see like the origin of their tension and strained relationship, which is that Emily thinks that Lorelai should have gotten married to Rory's father when she got pregnant at 16, and Lorelai is like, what the hell? You do not get to tell me how to live my life. And Emily's like, yes, I do. You know, you have to do things the right nuclear family way. And anyway, they get into a whole fight about this, and basically it's revealed over the course of this fight that Lorelai is borrowing money from the grandparents so she can pay for children, which she didn't want to tell Rory earlier because she didn't want to admit like her financial struggles. But Rory overhears this admittance. Rory knows how strained their relationship is between her mom and her grandparents, and she knows like how hard that must have been for Lorelai to do. So yeah, Lorelai and Rory make up. She agrees to go to Chilton, and then they go to Luke's for their second dinner. And that is the end of the pilot, finally. Sorry that this took so long. I feel like I've been talking forever. There are so many damn words in this show. There's so much dialogue. I think that this show like set a record for the amount of like the script pages per episode or something. So sorry if this video is gonna be super long, but yeah, that was the pilot. And basically the main three things you need to take away from the pilot about the Gilmore Girlies is that 1, they are caffeine and junk food addicts. 2, they are like really close, both in age, and then also at least everyone around them tells them that they're really close in like demeanor, like similar personalities. Basically, they're more like friends than mother and daughter. And then the third thing is that they both might be like witches or like have some sort of spell on them, because they both have this weird, like almost supernatural ability to make every man who comes across their path like instantly fall in love with them, basically. And speaking of men on this show, I think now that we've gone through the pilot and introduced a lot of the main characters and players in this first season, I think it's time to introduce the other main aspect of this recap, which is this thing. And you may be asking some questions to yourself, like, what is this thing? And are we going to just ignore the fact that it's clearly leaning, which yes, we are. I'm not a construction worker, okay? I tried my best. So essentially, if you've ever met a Gilmore Girls fan, I can like guarantee you with like a 92% certainty that the first question that they asked you once you told them that you like watched the show or knew anything about it was, what team are you on? Which teams in the context of Gilmore Girls pretty much mean which of Rory's boyfriends or love interests throughout the show did you like the best? And it's a very, very important and critical aspect to the Gilmore Girlies fandom. So I thought it very pertinent to include in my video. So essentially what this board is going to be serving as is a pro-con list for each of both Rory and also Lorelai, because I wanted to, each of their love interests. I mean, like obviously we're not going to be talking about everything they do in the show, but every time they do something like notably good, they get a pro, and then every time they do something notably bad, as specifically in the context of a relationship, they get a con. And I did it in the format of pro-con list because if you watch the show, the girlies love a pro-con list. But essentially, like I was saying, the question of what team are you on is like a very critical, important question within the Gilmore Girls fandom. It is probably the question. So which team you decide you're on is a very, very important choice and something you need to be paying attention to. So pay attention to this board throughout the video. Listen up, class. Obviously, it's going to be full of my own personal bias, what I put in the pros and cons for each of these characters, because like I'm a human being. So take it with a grain of salt, and you're probably going to disagree with me on some things, but it's a good format to help you and also me determine what team are we on. So right now we only have the love interest from season 1 through 3 on the board. And also this board is not going to contain like every person they have like sort of romantic feelings or interactions with throughout the show. But it also doesn't contain just like committed actual relationships. You know, it just contains the people that I thought would be most interesting to talk about, basically. But essentially, the two men that we've met so far on this board would be Dean up here and then Luke. So just to give an example, I'll put an entry in for both of them. For Dean, basically, as we've established, he is a stalker. And then for Luke, I'm going to put a pro down, and that is that he has a coffee. He runs a diner where he serves coffee, which some of these are going to be like more general. Like I think stalking would be like a con for anyone, but some of them are going to be more specific to like what Rory and Lorelai would like. And of course, since they're caffeine addicts, Luke having coffee is very important. So anyway, this is just going to show up periodically throughout the video whenever the boys do something notable. But for right now, we got to go back to talking about the girlies. So yeah, let's get into the rest of season 1. All right, so it is Rory's first day at Chilton, and Lorelai wakes up late and doesn't have time to pick up her dry cleaning, so she has to show up wearing this outfit, which honestly, I love this outfit. Like, it's cute to me. So they drive to Chilton, and of course, who is there but Emily, because as we'll see throughout the show, Emily has this sixth sense for just showing up whenever Lorelai is doing something like potentially embarrassing or humiliating, like wearing a rodeo outfit to meet with the headmaster of Rory's new big fancy private school. Which anyway, they go in and do meet with Headmaster Charleston, and we learn that Rory wants to be a journalist and she wants to study journalism at Harvard. Then after this, we see some students trying to sneak a look at Rory's new student file. And these students are Madeline, Louise, and Paris, who are kind of like the mean girls of the school, but like with a twist, like not really. We'll see their characters develop as the show goes on, but Paris is kind of like one of the most iconic just forces. She's like super intense, very rigorous about her academics, not super socially adept, but also like perhaps even a higher level of girl boss slay than Emily at points, which if that's even possible. And then Madeline and Louise are like more the typical girly, popular girls, whatever. But yeah, we see them looking at Rory's new student file, and Paris finds out that Rory wants to go into journalism and she wants to go to Harvard, which Paris also wants to go to Harvard and also like wants to run the school paper at Chilton, which is the Franklin. So she's immediately like, this new girl's fucking stepping on my turf. She better back off. We gotta do something about this, girlies. And Madeline and Louise are like, we don't care. We also meet in this episode Tristan, who is played by iconic early 2000s white boy of the month, Chad Michael Murray. Essentially, Rory comes into class and he's like, oh, who's the new girl? And he insists on calling Rory Mary throughout the show, which apparently is like a nickname for Virgin Mary. Like he thinks she's a I don't know. It's stupid. Okay, it's the 2000s. Boys do dumb things. So anyway, then Rory leaves her first class at Chilton where she meets Tristan. And who does she run into in the hallway but Paris? And she's basically like, back off my turf. You better not be trying out for the Franklin, you little small town podunk hippie girl. The Franklin is my turf and you will never be on my level. And Rory's like, who are you? At the next Friday night dinner, Emily finds out that Rory has to do some sort of physical education sport at Chilton. And she's basically like, well, your grandfather plays golf, because of course he does. So why don't you go down to the club with him sometimes and he can teach you that and you can do that for your Chilton little sport activity thing. And of course nobody wants to do that, but it's Emily and Emily always gets her way. So Rory ends up going on a little golfing date with Richard, and when she gets back, Lorelai is like trying to commiserate with her. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry that you had to spend the day with my awful, awful father, kid. And Rory is like, oh no, honestly, it wasn't that bad. Like we got along, honestly. Like, and Lorelai gets super jealous that Rory wants to spend time with her parents that she hates instead of her. And then they get into a fight about whose boobs are bigger. This episode is weird. So basically, Rory has been at Chilton for like a couple weeks now, and she's finding like the adjustment, the transition to the new school, like harder than she expected. Because at her old school, she's used to being like the smartest one, like Miss Einstein brainy girl. But at this new school, everyone's super rich and smart. So she like doesn't feel special anymore, which we'll learn throughout the series. That's a hard feeling for Rory. Basically, Rory ends up getting a D on her English paper, and she's super depressed about it and doesn't tell Lorelai because she's embarrassed. Later that week, Lorelai goes to a parent-teacher conference at Chilton, and who does she meet but Mr. Max Medina? Max Medina. So Max Medina is Rory's English teacher, and he is, of course, like every man she comes across, instantly charmed by Lorelai because, I don't know, she likes coffee and she's not like other moms. Max is like, oh, Rory's a great student. I hope like she doesn't feel too bad about the bad grade she got. Like, it takes a while to adjust to a new school like Chilton. And Lorelai's like, what? He tells her that Rory basically got a D on her English paper, and then Lorelai's like, oh shit, I gotta go, because if Rory got a D, then she's feeling really D for depressed. So Lorelai goes home, and she's like, okay, Rory, so what do we gotta do to fix this? And Rory's like, okay, well, I basically have this test that's worth 25% of my grade. That's tomorrow. And then Lorelai's like, okay, we'll just have to stay up all night studying. They do that, and they fall asleep in the kitchen. And since this is the early 2000s, a time before iPhones, they don't have any alarms that go off. And they end up waking up late on the kitchen counter. And Rory is freaking out. She's like, shit, I'm gonna miss the test. So Lorelai's like, fine, you take my car and you drive to school. Rory is driving to school. She's like driving through the woods or something, and then she just stops in the middle of the road to call Lane and ask if she has like one of her textbooks at her house. Like, hello, girlie, you're about to miss the test. You're late to school. What are you doing? Go. And then while she's sitting there just in the middle of the woods, some deer runs out and runs straight into the car. And then Rory is like, what the hell? A deer just ran into my car. And then she jumps out of the car to go try and look for the deer and say, hello, your test is going on right now. Move! What are you doing? Rory finally gets to school after her gallivanting with the damn deer. Rory walks in and she's like, hey, I'm ready to take the test. And Mr. Max Medina is like, no, you're not. You missed the test. You gotta go sit outside and wait till it's done. And then she like has a complete mental breakdown and she like screams at Paris and Tristan. And then Mr. Medina sends her to Headmaster Charleston's office. So then Lorelai gets called into the headmaster's office as well, and when she shows up, she gets super angry as well and goes in and yells at Headmaster Charleston and calls him Il Duce, and basically reveals that her and Rory might be a little bit too close on something. She's like, we have been up all night studying. How could you allow this? We're just one person. And Headmaster Charleston is like clearly judging them, and he basically gives them a stern lecture and sends them home without their supper. So then Lorelai and Rory go and drive back to Stars Hollow through the deer woods, and Lorelai is like, I am sorry if I put too much pressure on you to be super academically minded and go to Harvard. Like, you don't have to put this much pressure on yourself to exceed at Chilton if you don't want to. And Rory's like, no, I can do this at Chilton. I'll just have to do a bunch of extra credit to make up for it, but I want to be smart Einstein brainiac girly. Lorelai and Rory get back home, and who is waiting on their answering machine but Max Medina. And he leaves Lorelai a message and basically asks her out because apparently yelling at his boss really turns him on or something. So Lorelai is a little bit hesitant about going out with Max Medina because he's Rory's teacher, which that's like fair, I think. But eventually they agree to go out on a date. Meanwhile, Rory has been basically trying to awkwardly avoid Deany boy over here. Remember him? She's seeing him around town and like basically trying to awkwardly avoid him because she has a crush on him. And then basically he doesn't get her like little YN girly awkwardness. So he's like, I thought you were interested, but like if I'm bothering you, I'll leave you alone from now on. And Rory's like, wait, no, I am interested. So might be something going on with Rory and Dean in the future. So now it's time for the fall fair in Stars Hollow. It's like super exciting. Like the whole town's decked out in like pumpkins and autumn leaves. It's super cute. Lorelai's wearing this super cute aesthetic outfit. But you know who's not excited for the fall fair is Luke. Because he is Mr. Grumpy Curmudgeonly. He does not want to participate in any of the small town festivities. But who does want him to participate is Mr. Taylor Dozy over here. So Taylor Dozy is essentially, he runs the town market, Dozy's Market, and he's also the town selectman, which is kind of like the mayor, but also not. He has very strict ideas about how the town should be and preserving historical accuracy and decorations and festivities, and he tries to run the town under an iron grip, all in his little Taylor Swift folklore cardigan. Anyway, so he's in Luke's diner and he's trying to convince Luke to put up fall decorations. Then, speaking of Taylor Dozy, Rory goes over to Dozy's Market to meet up with Dean because he is working as a little bag boy over there. So she's trying to be all sly, pretending that she's there to buy stuff like cornstarch or something. But then she runs into Dean and they start talking, and then Dean gives Rory her first kiss. And then she says, thank you, and then runs out of the market, cornstarch, unpurchased cornstarch in hand, and runs straight to Lane's house. She's like, oh my God, I just got kissed. And Lane is like, oh my God, Dean kissed you. So they're freaking out, but they get overheard by Mrs. Kim, who, no kissing in her house. Then after that, Rory goes home, but she does not tell her mother about the kiss. But the next day, Lorelai goes over to the Kims, which I don't know if I mentioned this, but the Kims' house, like Mrs. Kim basically runs an antique shop out of their house. So Lorelai is going over there to pick up a piece of furniture, and Mrs. Kim does not like Lorelai because she thinks that she's a hussy, basically. She thinks she's a loose woman, not a woman of God. Lorelai apologizes because she's like late to pick up the piece of furniture she ordered or whatever, and Mrs. Kim is like, well, maybe you should be more on top of your furniture orders, and also maybe you should be more on top of your daughter's habits and not let her run around town kissing boys. And Lorelai is like, what are you talking about? Rory did not kiss a boy. And Miss Kim is like, yes she did. I heard her and Lane talking about her kissing some boy in the market. The market where we buy our food. Shame, 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 shame. Anyway, so Lorelai is like, oh shit, Rory got kissed. So then she runs out and goes home and waits for Rory to get back. And when she does, Lorelai says, hey, kiss any good boys lately? So then Rory basically has to admit that she and Dean kissed. And then she invites Dean to come over and watch Willy Wonka with them on a very awkward mother-daughter first date. Lorelai is having a great day because apparently alongside her like supernatural ability to bewitch every man she sees, she also has some weird ability to like be able to sniff out snow before it comes, and Lorelai loves the snow. Later that week, her premonitions of snow are confirmed because Emily calls her at the inn and tells her that there's a big blizzard forecasted. So she thinks that Rory should just come over after school instead of going home. So Lorelai gets out of work and decides that she's gonna take a walk around in the snow. And who does she spot getting his car fixed but Max Medina. Max Medina. So Lorelai goes to meet up with him, and he's like, hey, I asked you out and you agreed to go, but we never actually ended up going on that date. And Lorelai's like, well, why don't we go on the date now? This is my town. I'll show you all the good hookup spots. I don't know. They end up going on a date. Luke sees them out of his diner window and gets very jealous. Meanwhile, Rory is stuck with her grandparents in Hartford. Emily calls her down and is like, Rory, we need your help with dinner, basically, because apparently their maid slash cook slash whatever, they're rich, they have servants, whatever. They couldn't make it in because of the storm, and since Emily and Richard don't cook for themselves, they have no idea what to do. Then Rory is like, well, let's just look in the fridge. So Rory goes through and she finds frozen pizza in there. And it's like, wow, you guys eat frozen pizza? And they're like, no, must be the maids. And Rory's like, well, let's make that for dinner. They just go ahead and eat the maid's food, apparently. Rory makes frozen pizza for Emily and Richard. They don't want to eat it because it's poverty food, but Rory sprinkles some Parmesan cheese on it, and they end up enjoying the pleasures of peasant life. Anyway, back in Stars Hollow, Lorelai and Max are on their little date. They go back to Lorelai's house. Lorelai reveals that apparently since Rory's born, she's never let a man in the house before. So this is a big deal. Next day, Rory gets back and finds her sleeping English teacher on her living room couch. And that's fun. So Rory and Lorelai have a discussion about it. Lorelai's like, well, how do you feel about the fact that there is a man in the house? And Rory is like, well, kind of weird considering the fact that that man is my high school teacher. But, you know, I'm happy for you to date whoever you want. Next episode, Chilton is hosting a winter formal dance, and Rory is trying to be all like, not like other girls and pretend that she doesn't want to go, but in reality, she really does. So eventually, she ends up asking Dean if he'll go to the dance with her, and he is all like, do I have to go to the dance and wear a tie? Oh, but my masculinity. Eventually, with much reluctance, he agrees to go, and Emily also comes over so she can take a bunch of pictures. So then Rory and Dean go to the dance and they run into everyone. Drama ensues, of course. Madeline and Louise try to hit on Dean. Paris is there, apparently with her cousin. And Tristan sees Rory and Dean and gets super jealous, and he tries to confront Dean and get in a fight with him. And then Dean is being big, macho, protective boyfriend and is like, you don't want to fight me, Tristan. I'll kill you. Also, you're wearing a tie. And ties are for pussies. And then Dean and Rory leave the dance. They go back to Stars Hollow and are walking down the street, and Rory is clearly like struggling to carry her bag, and Dean is like, here, I'll take that for you. And he's like, this is a heavy, what do you have in this? That's when Rory reveals that apparently she brings a book with her everywhere she goes. So then Dean and Rory go into Miss Patty's. He starts reading the little book she has, and apparently it's a very boring book since they fall asleep at Miss Patty's. And then the next morning, Lorelai wakes up to Emily vigorously shaking her, and Emily is like, Rory didn't come back last night. Lorelai's looking for the phone so she can try and call someone, and Emily's having a whole meltdown. And of course, as she always does, she takes it out on Lorelai and is like, this is all your fault, Lorelai. And Lorelai is like, I've had enough of you. Get out of my house, Mom. So they have a big blow up. So Emily and Lorelai are still in a fight about the whole Rory not coming home from the dance thing. So Emily essentially uninvites Lorelai from their like annual little Christmas party get together thing, which Lorelai tries to pretend that she doesn't care about, but actually she's pretty upset about it. So Lorelai is commiserating with Luke And she's just like, oh, well, it's the holidays, Luke. I know you don't care about festivities, but I like to be around my family and eat festive food. So Luke makes her a Santa burger, which is really sweet. But honestly, once you think about it for longer than 2 seconds, like really looks really nasty. And I always thought the white stuff was mayo, but apparently Luke says it's cream cheese, which is somehow even worse. Anyway, while Lorelai is at Luke's diner eating that nasty-ass Santa burger, she gets a call from Emily, and apparently Richard passed out at their dinner and had to be taken to the hospital. Lorelai is, of course, like having a complete freak out about this, and Luke, of course, because he's in love with Lorelai, like immediately does not even hesitate, just shuts down the entire diner, and he drives Lorelai to the hospital, where they eventually find Emily, who is trying to find Richard's room, and she's like, oh, Lorelai, you're here with Luke. And Lorelai's like, of course I'm here. I got a call that said Dad was in the hospital. And then Emily's like, well, why is Luke here? And then Lorelai's like, he gave me a ride. He's at his diner eating. And Emily's like, okay, sure, whatever you say, Lorelai, because apparently she's had her suspicions about Lorelai and Luke being an item. Anyway, eventually they do find Richard's room, and the doctor says he's gonna be okay, just a minor thing, which everyone's, of course, relieved by, and, you know, nothing like potentially fatal illness to bring a family together, so they all sort of forgive each other and make up as well for the holidays. So Lorelai and Max have been dating for a while now. Max gives her a copy of Marcel Proust to read because he's Mr. Smart academic teacher man. But Lorelai is starting to get cold feet about the whole thing. The next day, Chilton is hosting some it's like a parent-teacher conference, but it's like during school. I don't know what it is. It's just some excuse for Lorelai to show up. And after going to Rory's classes with her, she stays behind to talk to Mr. Medina, and she brings his copy of the Proust book, intending to give it back to him and break up with him. But she doesn't end up breaking up with him. Instead, these two are just complete horn dogs and end up making out like in the middle of the classroom. And who spots them but Paris Geller? Uh-oh. What does Paris immediately do but go around and tell everybody in the school that she caught Rory's mom making out with a teacher? So after that, Max and Lorelai meet up to discuss their relationship, and Lorelai is like, you know, this is completely my fault. Like, I wasn't saying in my right mind clearly. So I want to make this work between us two. But then Max Medina says that he got in trouble with the headmaster for having relations with the student's mother in the school. And he's like, this relationship is like potentially inappropriate and could cost me my job. I don't think this is gonna work out anymore, which is fair, but that never seemed to be a problem before for you guys. Seems like you're just a little bit upset you got caught, bestie. But anyway, he breaks up with her. So apparently Lane has a crush on Dean's friend Todd. So she asked Rory to like tell Dean to set them up on a double date. But for some reason, Dean is like super reluctant to do that. Like, okay, like you don't think Lane is good enough for your dopey little friend? Meanwhile, Sookie asks Jackson, who is the produce guy for the Independence Inn, out on a date. But the week that she asked him out, apparently his cousin is in town and Jackson has to spend time with him. So Sookie's solution to this is to apparently invite Lorelai on a double date with them after just breaking up with Max in the last episode. This is bound to be fun. Lane and Rory are preparing for their double date. Obviously, Mrs. Kim is not going to be okay with Lane going out on a date. So Rory and Lane decide that they're just going to tell Mrs. Kim that they're staying at Rory's house. So then Lorelai meets her date for the night, which is Jackson's cousin Rune, who is basically this tiny little man-child who dresses like a 19th century peasant and constantly insults Lorelai about her shoe size and whatever. Anyway, he's the worst date of all time, and Sookie and Jackson's date is not going too well either, because Sookie is being super awkward and trying to deflect all her questions onto Lorelai. Meanwhile, over on the teenagers' double date, Lane is not having that great a time either. Apparently, Todd is he's just a himbo, basically, which is not Lane's type. She turns into every millennial white man on Twitter and judges him for not knowing the band on his t-shirt. Lorelai tries to fix Sookie and Jackson's little date by taking them out of their uncomfortable fancy French restaurant, and they go to Luke's and they kick Rune out of the party, and Lorelai kind of leaves them alone and goes up to the counter to talk to Luke, and it seems like Luke is just about to ask her out on a date when who walks in the door but Mrs. Kim, who is super upset because apparently she can't find Lane. She said she called the house like 10 million times, and Lorelai is like, well, they're not at the house, they're out at a movie with Dean. And Miss Kim is like, they're with a boy. Then the moms storm into the kids' little double date and break it up, and Lorelai tells Rory that it's not okay for her to lie about Lane's whereabouts to Mrs. Kim because of mom code, apparently. Which, keep this rule in the back of your mind for some other situations that Lane gets in with these two later, which definitely don't hold up to mom code. So Lorelai and Rory are running a little town rummage sale out of their house to try and raise money to fix the Stars Hollow Bridge or whatever. Anyway, Lorelai is, instead of giving any clothes away, just going through all the boxes that people in town have brought in and borrowing new clothes for her own closet, which is so me-coded, honestly. Anyway, so one of the items that Lorelai borrows is this little zip-up sweater thing that's covered in sequins, and she ends up wearing it to Luke's diner, and for some reason he gets super irrationally angry about Lorelai wearing this sweater and yells at her and is like, that's not yours, take that off. So then Lorelai runs into Sookie, and Sookie tells her that apparently she got 4 tickets to see the Bangles in New York City, which is one of Lorelai's favorite bands. So she's super excited, and she's like, oh yeah, me and you and Rory and Lane are all gonna go. She is still kind of confused about that whole incident with Luke earlier, so she asks Sookie why would he get upset about me wearing this sweater? And Sookie is like, oh, it must have been Rachel's. And Lorelai is like, who's Rachel? And Sookie is like, Rachel's this very serious girlfriend that Luke had a couple years back, which apparently Lorelai didn't know about somehow, even though she spends about 18 hours in that diner every day. Anyway, back at Chilton, Rory is working on a group project, and who is assigned to her group but Paris, Madeline, and Louise, of course. They all have to come over to Rory's house to work on the project. Rory tells Lorelai that apparently Lane can't go to the concert with them because she told her mom, and of course her mom said, no, you can't go to a rock concert. And Lorelai's response to this is to say, oh, that was stupid. Why would she tell her mom the truth? Hello, Miss Lady, what happened to mom code? Rory and the prep school girlies over here are all working on their project in the living room. Lorelai sees for the first time that Rory is actually kind of getting along and talking with them, and since Rory doesn't have any friends at school, that's kind of a big deal. So Lorelai offers to give up the tickets to the Bangles to the Chilton girlies, and her and Sookie will just go there and sit in nosebleeds or whatever, which, Look, if I was Sookie, I'd be like, what the hell, bitch? I waited 5 hours in that damn Ticketmaster line. Now you're just giving it away to some prep school girlies? Anyway, they all go to New York for the concert, and Rory and Paris actually kind of bond in the concert over their like mutual boringness and slow swaying to the music. So Paris and Rory might be a little bit kind of friends now. Next episode, oh god, how do I even start with this one? Lorelai, Rory, and Dean, they're all watching like the Donna Reed show, which is like this 50s sitcom about some traditional 50s housewife. And since Lorelai and Rory are queens of feminism, obviously, they're both just like talking over the show and sort of like making fun of the, you know, stereotypes around sexism in the 50s or whatever. And then Dean butts in and he's like, I don't know, sounds kind of nice to me. And these girlies are shocked silent. You can see their heads like slowly turn around with like the look of complete astonishment in their eyes. And Dean is like, what? Like the idea of like a wife cooking dinner for her husband? I don't see what's wrong with that. That sounds kind of nice to me. And oopsies, said the wrong things to these girlies. I think I meant to put on the con list for Dean that he thinks the 50s were the good old days, but I think I forgot to do that. But just keep that in mind. Back at Luke's diner, Taylor is trying to get Luke to spruce up the place and give it a little paint job. And Luke, of course, hates sprucing and anything involving decorating. So he's like, no, I'm not doing that. But then Lorelai is like, hey, why not? I'll help you paint. And then Luke is like, maybe painting's not such a bad idea. And Taylor is flabbergasted by this, and he ends up losing a bet that Luke would never paint the place to Kirk. I couldn't find a better way to introduce Kirk than this. So basically, Kirk, he's kind of like the Barbie of Stars Hollow in that he has worked every single job around town, but he is also kind of like mama's boy, like still lives in his parents' basement, like neglected child vibes. So then after Rory gets out of Chilton, you know what? No, I'm gonna let you guess what Rory is doing after school. You know, Rory, she goes to big, fancy, private prep school. She wants to go to Harvard in 3 years. What do you think that Rory is doing after school today? Let me ask the audience. If you guessed dressing up in a 50s apron and pearl, making mashed potatoes and green jello for dinner, and then inviting Dean over for Donna Reed night, then you would be correct. Rory apologizes to Dean for some reason for the whole Donna Reed thing. Basically, they make up and they spend the night doing whatever in that damn Donna Reed cosplay. Let's not think about it too much. The next day, Lorelai and Rory are outside of Dosey's Market when some guy pulls up on a motorcycle and tells Lorelai to take her top off. And this man is Christopher, Rory's father. So Lorelai is like, hey Christopher, cool of you to just show up, I guess. What are you doing in town? I thought you were living in California. He's like, yeah, I am, but I decided to just swing by Stars Hollow, you know, to see my girlies, my Gilmore Girlies. And Lorelai's like, okay, well, that's suspicious. That's weird because up until now, you've been kind of like absent father, like infrequent phone calls, like we only see you on like Christmas and birthdays kind of vibes. But he says apparently his startup business in California is really taking off, so he wanted to come in and surprise them. So Christopher takes Rory to the bookstore and is like, hey kid, I'm kind of loaded now, like I'll buy you any book you want. But then when he gets up to the register, his card gets declined. So maybe that startup business is not going as well as he said. But he tells Rory not to tell Lorelai about this incident. So Emily and Richard are super ecstatic to hear that Christopher is back in town because, of course, they love Christopher. They wanted Lorelai to marry him, remember? So anyway, they invite him and the girlies all over to a Friday night dinner with Christopher's parents, Strobe and Francine. Can't see how this could go wrong. When they get to the Friday night dinner, there's clearly a lot of tension and animosity going on. Rory is feeling super awkward and in the middle of everything. And of course, Strobe and Francine come out of the gate super confrontational and like immediately blame Lorelai for like derailing Christopher's life. They're like, you had to go and get yourself pregnant, you evil trollop, and derail our darling boy Christopher's life. They're not British. I don't know why I'm giving them an awful accent. Richard gets super mad about Strobe's insults and like nearly fucking decks him across the face. And then Lorelai goes to Richard and is like, hey, thank you, Dad, for defending me against Strobe. And he's like, don't think I forgive you, little girl. You tarnished the Gilmore name and precious reputation. Anyway, Lorelai is feeling pretty shitty about herself after this whole night. So she sneaks out to the balcony and has sex with Christopher. But she realizes that this was when she was supposed to meet up with Luke for their little painting date. Remember that? And she missed it. So now she's feeling even more shitty about herself. Chris stays over, and the next day he tells Lorelai that he wants to be more involved in Rory's life. And she's like, you know what? I think that's great, Chris. Rory could always use another pal. And Chris is like, okay, that's great. Well, let's get married then. And Lorelai is like, excuse me, what the hell? No, I can't get married to you. And Christopher is like, why not? We already have a daughter together, so that part's over with. And we have so much history together. And also, like, I am stable now. My business is doing good. Remember I told you? And Lorelai is like, well, business can't be doing that good if your card got declined at the bookstore. And Christopher is like, damn it, Rory told you about that? She's such a little snitch. And Lorelai is like, no, she didn't. Actually, the bookstore clerk told me about that. But thanks for telling our daughter not to talk to me. So Christopher knows he's in trouble now, basically. So he decides to kind of leave with his tail between his legs and head back to California. So Stars Hollow is setting up for their annual Firelight Festival to celebrate the town's founding, where they like throw a huge bonfire, and apparently it's like some story of two star-crossed lovers. But anyway, everyone's feeling all lovey-dovey around the Firelight Festival or whatever. And Lorelai is super not having it because apparently, as she tells to Rory, she is not over MAAAX. Anyway, Lorelai is not into the whole Firelight Festival lovey-dovey town festivities things. Who is here to support her in her grumpiness but Luke, who never likes town festivities, as we know. So she is complaining about love when who walks in the door to Luke's diner but Rachel. Remember her? Luke's old girlfriend with the sweater? She's back in town apparently, so now Lorelai is the only one alone. Meanwhile, apparently it is Dean and Rory's 3-month anniversary. So Dean takes Rory out to this Italian restaurant, and then they go to an abandoned junkyard, which is a little bit scary, honestly. But Rory doesn't end up getting kidnapped. Actually, Dean instead reveals to her that he's been building her a car, which is honestly very impressive. Points for Dean on that one. And then they like climb into like Rory's DIY car that Dean's been building her, and Dean tells Rory that he loves her. And Rory says, I love the car, And then Dean is like, Rory, did you hear me? I love you. Say it back. And she's like, I don't know. I wasn't prepared for this. I mean, this is complicated for me. Look at my mom. Dean gets super upsetty about this and is like, oh, what do you want to do? Go talk to your mom about it? Make one of your pro-con lists? And you know what, Deany boy? That's exactly what we're gonna do. There we go, right on the con side. Mocks the pro-con list. So the next day, Rory is in her hustle culture grind set era and wakes Lorelai up at like 6 a.m. so they can do a bunch of chores or something. Lorelai is like, hun, you just had a big breakup. Why are you up at 6 a.m.? Don't you want to wallow? And Rory's like, no, I don't want to wallow. Like, will wallowing help me get over Dean? And Lorelai's like, no, the only thing that helps you get over a breakup is time. And then Rory is like, well then, how much time did it take you to get over Mr. Max Medina? And Lorelai is like, well, shit got me there, kid, because she is not over him. Basically, since gossip spreads super fast in Stars Hollow, everybody already knows that Rory and Dean broke up. And since in Stars Hollow, like, Rory is literally the messiah, like she is their perfect baby angel child. They all love Rory and they all hate Dean, and he's public enemy number one, and Luke even tries to beat him up in like the street when he tries to come into the diner. Rory is convinced not to wallow and be depressed after her breakup, so she ends up going to a party at Madeline and Louise's house. They don't live together, but it's one of their houses. But Lorelai convinces her to bring Lane with her because she wants Rory to have like a friend there or something. But also, is Lane telling her mom that she's going to this Chilton party? Because I feel like Mrs. Kim would not say yes to that. So is Lorelai encouraging lying to the mother? What happened to mom code? Hello? Anyway, Rory shows up at the party with Lane, but then Lane gets asked to dance by this Chilton boy named Henry Cho, and they end up really hitting it off. So that means Rory is left all by herself. She pulls out her book to read, obviously, but while she's reading, she spots a big fight between Tristan and his girlfriend, Summer. So she ends up following Tristan into some like back room of the house and is like, I'm sorry that happened to you, basically, to Tristan. Like, Summer's a jerk and you deserve better or whatever. And Tristan's like, I thought you hated me. Like, why are you being nice to me? And Rory's like, I don't hate you. And then Tristan is like, well, your boyfriend does. And then Rory's like, well, we broke up. He's not my boyfriend anymore, bestie. And then Tristan decides this is a great time to kiss Rory. So he kisses Rory, and then I think in this moment, it really hits her that she's broken up with Dean. So she starts crying in the middle of their kiss and then runs out. So that was a fun little interaction right there. Meanwhile, Lorelai, as we realized earlier in this episode by her conversation with Rory, she is not over Max Medina. So she drives over to his house and they like hook up and they agree that they're gonna try to make it work between them and they'll like call each other once a week or something. So Rory is working on another group project at Chilton, and this time she is, of course, paired up with Paris, Madeline, Louise, and also Tristan for plot reasons. Anyway, Rory and Tristan, they're in a very awkward position after the whole kiss and cry incident, but Rory and Paris, if you remember, are actually sort of getting along after the whole concert. So Rory knows that Paris likes Tristan, like she's basically had a crush on him ever since kindergarten. So she decides she's gonna set them two up on a date. Rory is talking to Tristan and basically convinces him to ask Paris out on a date, but it's clear he's doing it just because he wants to impress Rory, basically. So Lorelai and Rory go over to the Gilmore house for their weekly Friday night dinner, and who is visiting, but Richard's mom, her name is also Lorelai technically, but they call her like Gran, or Richard calls her Trix. Richard is super excited to have his mom there because he's a huge mama's boy. However, Emily is freaking out because Gran and her have never gotten along. Like, Gran always seems disappointed in her and like criticizes everything she does, which, sound familiar? Sound like any other relationship on this board? Anyway, Gran's over and she's eating dinner and criticizing everything Emily does, and she says that she wants to meet with the girlies, the Gilmore Girlies, all of them, the next day for lunch because she has something big to discuss with them. But Rory's like, actually, I have to work on a group project for school tomorrow, so I don't think I can make it. Lorelai goes to meet with Gran and Emily the next day to hear Gran's big news. And apparently, Gran has managed to out-girl boss Emily because she heard about the loan that Lorelai was getting from the Gilmores in order to pay for Rory's Chilton tuition. And she's like, actually, you know what? I have a trust fund that I've been creating for Rory, and I was planning to bequeath it to her when she turned 25. But given your little situation, I could consider giving the money to Rory earlier so you can pay for Chilton. So Gran is like, so do you want it? Do you want the $250,000? And Lorelai is like, hell yes, of course I do. And Emily is like, hell no. Emily is clearly very threatened by this because she knows that this loan, this financial obligation, is the only reason that Lorelai and Rory, along with her, come to see them every week. Lorelai is like, okay, I'm gonna leave and tell Rory that she's about to get a small loan of $1 million, basically. But Emily corners her before she leaves and is like, you can't let Rory get that money. And Lorelai is like, Mom, you're crazy. What are you even talking about? And Emily is like, Rory gets that money, she's never gonna come back. Like, she won't need you anymore. And it's clear that Emily is projecting because really, that's what she feels about Lorelai. But Lorelai is spooked by this anyway and ends up not telling Rory that night about the trust fund. So the next day, they're back at Chilton. Tristan and Paris just went on their date the previous night, and Paris is clearly like super happy about it. She had a great time. But then Tristan comes in and Paris is like, oh, we should do that again sometime. And Tristan's like, yeah, we should, as friends. And then Paris is like, oh, yeah, as friends. That's totally, completely what I meant. And Tristan then says, when Rory suggested that I take you out on a date, I thought it was a bad idea, but, I think we could honestly be friends in the future. Like, I had a good time. Uh-oh. So then Paris goes over and confronts Rory and is basically like, I don't need your pity. I don't need your sympathy to like try and set me up on dates with guys who clearly like you. Like, I was just humiliated in front of the whole school. So I think the little small stage of them not hating each other is gonna be over. Anyway, then Rory goes up to Tristan and is like, what the hell? Why would you tell her that I was the one who suggested this? Like, why would you like friend zone her in front of the whole class? Like, you didn't even try. It was one date. And Tristan is like, I don't think it would be fair to Paris to keep leading her on and going out with her when I like somebody else. And then Rory is like, oh, so you're not over Summer. Girl, get a clue! Get a clue! So the next day, Emily, Lorelai, and Gran are meeting again to like finalize their decision, basically. So Emily and Lorelai show up at the restaurant first, and Emily basically learns that Lorelai hasn't told Rory about the trust fund yet. So Emily is super gloaty about it, and she's like, I guess something I said got to you. Lorelai is like, you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, they get into a whole fight about it, and then Gran shows up in the middle of their fight and is like, well, I was gonna write a check for $250,000 today, but I see that you two are way too immature to handle this money if you're fighting in this public place. So, too bad. Trust funds off the table, basically. And Lorelai has to go and tell Rory that she lost out on $250,000 today. So remember when Rachel just showed up randomly back in town? Rachel, Luke's ex-girlfriend. Well, apparently she's been staying at Luke's apartment. They've kind of had something going on for the past couple weeks. And she's also been sort of getting along with Lorelai because Lorelai is at the diner 24/7, basically. So Rachel is a photographer and she has been taking pictures of this like old abandoned inn around town called the Dragonfly. And if we remember, from the very first episode, Lorelai has like big dreams of starting her own inn one day with Sookie. So she sees the pictures Rachel's taking of this inn and is like, wow, that's the Dragonfly. Like, I've thought about buying that old place for a while. And Rachel's like, oh, you want to like head out there with me? Lorelai's like, yeah, sure. Luke is kind of weirdly reluctant about this. He seems like he doesn't like these two getting along. But anyway, Rachel and Lorelai go out to go see the Dragonfly, and Rachel basically tells Lorelai that she is super enjoying spending time with Luke, and she is honestly like serious about a relationship this time and staying in Stars Hollow. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned that the reason Rachel and Luke broke up was that she was like super adventurous, travel the world kind of girly, and Luke is very much like, I gotta stay at home and run my diner and never leave my small town kind of guy. So she just like packed up and left one day without saying goodbye. So Rachel, this time she says she's serious about Luke, wants to stay in Stars Hollow, but Luke still has like trust issues basically from the last time she ran off. So she asked for Lorelai's help because she knows Lorelai and Luke are close. And she's like, Lorelai, can you convince Luke that I'm like serious this time? And Lorelai's like, I don't know. I guess I'll try. So later, Rory is talking to Lane, and apparently she's been like sneaking phone calls with Henry Cho. Remember, he's the guy from the Chilton party that she was dancing with. She has been like kind of dating him, like just talking with him, but she has to sneak around Mrs. Kim. And Rory's like, well, when are you gonna tell your mom about this? Like, honestly, Henry seems like exactly the kind of guy your mom would approve of. Like, he's Korean, he wants to be a doctor, he goes to church, but Lane is afraid that if she tells her mom and her mom ends up liking Henry, that her mom's approval will cause her not to find Henry attractive anymore, basically. Meanwhile, Max and Lorelai, they agreed, remember, that they're gonna talk on the phone every week and like try to make it work. Apparently their phone conversations have been going well and they want to take it into 3D now. So they agree to make plans to meet up for like an actual date soon. So Rachel's birthday is coming up, and apparently Luke is a terrible gift giver. Lorelai sees him coming out of some shop called the Cat Club, and he reveals that the birthday present he bought for Rachel were like these cat pot holders, and Lorelai's like, what the hell, you can't get her that. You know, I don't know what this says about me, but I don't see what's wrong with the cat pot holders. Like, I feel like if someone got me that as a present, I would like it. But anyway, Lorelai insists on buying some potential presents for Rachel. So the next day, Lorelai walks into the diner with like 10,000 bags, and Luke is like, you got this all for Rachel? She's like, no, I have her a present. Like, I just got her book in a bag. They're over there. This is all for you. And Luke is like, what the hell? Don't buy me things. And she's like, well, they were having a 5,000,000% off sale at the men's section Bloomingdale's, so you have to at least try this on. Lorelai makes Luke like basically do a whole fashion show around the diner in the new clothes she bought him. And she goes over to help him put on a belt, of course. And who walks in right at that moment but Rachel, Luke's girlfriend, on her birthday. Yikes. Rachel is like, oh, what's going on in here? And Lorelai and Luke are like, oh, we were just trying on some clothes. Yeah, they were like 50,000,000% off. Oh, no, nothing weird going on here. Rachel's like, that's suspicious. That's weird. Also, don't you have a diner to run? Like, there's a bunch of customers all around that want food, and you're just doing a fashion show. Okay. So Rory has basically been super angsty emo girl about her breakup with Dean recently, and she's been like basically trying to avoid Dean everywhere she goes. Like, she refuses to go into Josie's Market. So Lane is working on a science project for school, and her science partner comes over to her house to work on the project with her. And who is her science partner? It's Deany boy, of course. So Lane and Dean are working on their science project together, and it's like super awkward between them because obviously Lane's his ex's best friend. Dean is like curious about Rory and is like asking how she's doing. And then who walks in the door to see Lane right at that moment but Rory Gilmore, because of course she does. She sees Lane and Dean sitting together and is like, oh, sorry I interrupted, and runs straight out. Lane follows her, of course, and is like, Rory, look, we're not friends. We were just working on a science project together. And Rory's like, fine, whatever. And Lane is like, well, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I just didn't want to like hurt your feelings because I know you're still like super torn up about this breakup. And Rory is still in her like angsty emo era. So she's like, ugh, whatever. I wish everyone would stop trying to protect me so much. Then Rory is at school. She's still super depressed and emo about Dean breakup. So she's like not paying attention in class. And Mr. Max Medina calls her to his desk, like after class, to like ask what's going on. Like, why aren't you paying attention, basically? Rory's like, well, my grades are fine. He's like, I know, but like, I'm just concerned about you. Like, I know breakups can be really hard. And then Rory is like, what the hell, dude? How did you know about my breakup? That's a little creepy, bestie. And then Max is like, well, your mom told me. And then Rory is like, well, when did my mom tell you? And then Max is like, when we like call each other every night. And Rory's like, what? And then he's like, oh, Lorelai didn't tell you about that, huh? She didn't tell you we were like back together. Oopsies. So she runs home to confront Lorelai about this, and she's like, why the hell didn't you tell me that you and Max were getting back together? And Lorelai is like, well, we literally started talking the day after you and Dean broke up, and I knew you were super torn up, and I didn't want to hurt you more by like being like, well, sorry your relationship is over, but mine is great actually. And Rory, again, is super upset. She's like, I'm so tired of everyone in this town trying to protect me. And then Rory is like, fine, whatever, I'm leaving. I'll meet you at home. So Lorelai knows that Rory is in this whole funk and bad mood because of Dean. So Lorelai is like, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to go over to this teenager's place of work and literally like confront him in front of his boss and the whole town about his little teenage relationship problems. And she does exactly that. She's like, you hooligan, who the hell do you think you are for breaking my daughter's heart? And Dean is like, God, I don't know why everyone in this town is against me and blaming me for this breakup. Like, I told Rory I loved her and she didn't say it back, and now it's my fault. And Lorelai's like, oh, because Rory never told her the reason they broke up. So now she's like, shit, I gotta find Rory and talk to her. So she goes back home, which, if you remember, is where Rory said she was going. But when she shows up, Rory is not there. So now Lorelai is really freaking out, and she's calling everyone she knows to try and find Rory. And she calls Max Medina, and they have a little aside conversation, and Max is like, well, why didn't you tell your daughter that we were getting back together? And Lorelai's like, no, I was just waiting for the right time. Like, she was going through this super hard breakup. And then Max is like, well, then you told your friends, right? And Lorelai is like, yeah, I was just about to do that. So they now have some awkward tension in their relationship as well. Anyway, eventually they get a call from Emily, who says that Rory is in at our house. And Lorelai is like, okay, fine, whatever. So she drives over to the Gilmore mansion and talks to Rory and is like, you know, you shouldn't feel pressured to say I love you if you're not ready and you don't want to, but also, like, you should feel like you're able to say it if you do want to and you are ready. And I don't want, like, my relationship issues to be the thing holding you back from going further in your own relationships, basically. So ever since the whole like diner fashion show incident, Luke has basically been avoiding Rachel and just spending all his time at Lorelai's house, like doing construction work or whatever. Rachel's really having a hard time of it, huh? Meanwhile, over in Rory's life, she is at Chilton. She's preparing for like the last couple days of school, and of course she gets asked out once again by Tristan, which she refuses because she's never really wanted to go out with Tristan because he's a dick, but especially after the whole Paris debacle, she definitely doesn't want to go out with him. So she's like, no, fuck off, Tristan. But since he's a little shitbag, he of course goes and tells Paris that he asked Rory to go out with him, and she said yes, because he knows that'll make Paris mad, which it does. So Paris goes and confronts Rory. She's like, bitch, our little stage of not absolutely hitting each other, it's over now. I'm back to being your arch nemesis, and next year I'm going to be editor of the school paper, the Franklin, and I'm going to make your life a living hell. So Rory may not want to go out with Tristan, but she might want to go out with another boy because she's basically been stalking Dean around town all week. She shows up to his house and makes his sister cry, and then she goes and asks Lane if she's spotted Dean with any other girlies at school. So clearly, Rory's a little bit interested in Dean again. Luke finally shows up back at the diner, and he sees Rachel coming out of the stairwell with a bunch of bags, and he's like, wow, so typical of you. Of course you're leaving again. Were you even planning on saying goodbye? He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not good enough for you, and you have to leave and go to like fancy places around the world or whatever. And Rachel's like, it's not about that, actually. And then Luke is like, well, what is it about? And Rachel is like, Lorelai, you're like clearly in love with her, so I don't think we can date. And Luke is like, what? In love? Lorelai? With Lorelai? In love? No. And then Rachel is like, okay, have fun with your denial then, bye. So she is done. Rachel is gone for good, besties. So Luke shows up at Lorelai's house to pick up his toolbox, because remember, he's been working on the house. And at the same time, Max shows up to pick up Lorelai to take her out on a date. So Luke and Max are like clearly very jealous. They get into a whole dick measuring contest over Lorelai, and Max is like, well, dude, I'm her boyfriend. And Luke is like, well, I have the coffee. And as we know, Lorelai needs the coffee. Anyway, eventually Luke leaves, and Max is like, Lorelai, whatever you had going on with that guy, is it over? And Lorelai's like, I had nothing going on with that guy. Like, me and Luke, we're just friends. We're just friends. What are you talking about? And Max is like, okay, sure. Then they get into a whole fight about Luke. They're still kind of mad about the fact that Lorelai didn't tell anyone about their relationship. And Lorelai is like, damn, this whole thing, we just figured it out. It was just going good. Like, why do we always have to ruin everything? And Max is like, I don't know, but I can only think of one solution to this. And Lorelai is like, yeah, we gotta break up. And Max is like, no, let's get married. Lorelai is like, what? And all of us are like, what? Lorelai is like, Max Medina, you did not just try to propose to me in the middle of a fight. And he's like, yes, I did. She's like, that is not how a proposal is supposed to go. It's supposed to be planned. There's supposed to be candles and horses and 1,000 yellow daisies. So anyway, Rory is walking out of Chilton. It's the last day of school. And who is, of course, following her and refusing to leave her alone? But Tristan. Like, dude, she already said no to your date. Back off. They walk out of the school. And who does Rory spot? But Deany, baby. So Deany boy is there, clearly to talk to Rory. But then he sees Rory with Tristan and then gets super jealous about that. And then Dean is like, whatever, Rory. I thought you liked me, but clearly you don't, and you just want to spend time with preppy Chilton boys or whatever. Anyway, Dean turns around to get in his car, and Rory is like, wait, Dean. And Dean is like, what? And she's like, I love you, you idiot. So there she goes. She said the magic words. So then they start making out in front of the stone lions at Chilton. So the next day, Lorelai gets a call from the inn because apparently there's a huge package delivered there. So she comes in and Michelle is super upset because he's like, we didn't order this. Now there's freaking flowers everywhere. And then Kirk is there delivering the flowers and he's like, well, somebody ordered exactly 1,000 yellow daisies to be delivered to Lorelai Gilmore. So Lorelai goes inside and she sees it's gotta be way more than 1,000 yellow daisies. It's gotta be more like 100,000 yellow daisies. But you know, that's the power of lying, I guess. Lorelai knows what this is about, so she calls Max and she's like, you got me 1,000 yellow daisies. And he's like, yes. Will you marry me? And then that's the end of season 1. Okay, so now that we're done with season 1, I think it's time to make some updates to the pro-con board here. So Dean, like I was saying, we already have cons for him here, that he's a stalker, and then also that he milks the pro-con list. But a pro for Dean, which I mentioned earlier, is that for their anniversary, he does reveal that he's built Rory a car. And I said he gets points for that, which he does. That's going on the pro side. That's pretty impressive. Let's not praise Dean too much now because I also want to put another con up for him. And that is that he whines about everything. He's super reluctant about everything Rory wants to do all the time. Like he has to be convinced to go to the Chilton dance with her because it threatens his masculinity or whatever. And then he also complains when Lane wanted to go out with his friend on a double date, why do you care? He is so whiny about literally everything, and it annoys me. Moving on, let's talk about Tristan. Pro for Tristan is that, like I said before, he is played by 2000s It Boy Chad Michael Murray. You know, honestly, I think that's the only reason why anyone actually likes Tristan. I don't think he really has any other redeeming qualities, to be honest. Speaking of which, we'll put a con down, and that's he basically embodies that trope of he's mean to you because he likes you. I don't know. I hate that trope where people will excuse young boys shitty behavior towards girls because it's an indication that they like them, but it's that's not how you should show someone you like them, bestie. And then for Luke, I'm gonna put a con down that, as we see with his whole Rachel situation, he's constantly in denial. He cannot be honest with himself. He constantly denies his feelings towards Lorelai. He is the girl who lives in delusion. And then that's kind of where I want to be at with this pro-con board right now. And we'll have a lot more to add next season. So I realized when I uploaded the footage for season 1 that you couldn't really see anyone's names back here. Yeah, I tried to fix it. So hopefully you can see it now and you have some idea of what's going on and who's who. So yeah, Lorelai has just been proposed to by Mr. Max Medina over here. The town is covered in what is apparently 1,000 yellow daisies, but Lorelai has yet to make a decision on whether or not she wants to accept this proposal yet. So anyway, Lorelai and Rory are at Friday night dinner, and Lorelai decides this is the best time to call Max and accept his proposal. Anyway, she tells Rory, And Rory's all excited about it. And Emily and Richard are like, what just happened? What's going on? What are you two so excited about? And Lorelai's like, nothing. Lorelai decides that she's not going to tell Richard and Emily about the engagement yet. So Dean and Rory are back together again, and Rory wants Dean to meet her grandparents. So she invites him over to their weekly Friday night dinner, their weekly F&D, if you will. And it is extremely awkward, as you might imagine. As we know, Emily is like super Miss Manners, so she's super polite to Dean. However, Richard is like, who is this poverty peasant boy who is dating my special perfect angel baby granddaughter? So he immediately peppers Dean with questions about, like, you know, where he's going to college and what he's planning to do with his future. And Dean is like, I don't really know, bestie. And Richard is like, you are not good enough to carry on the Gilmore name, or something like that. Anyway, then everybody gets mad at each other, and the Gilmore Girlies and Dean storm out. Then after that whole awkward class struggle, Emily gets a call from Sookie, who asks if she's gonna be in town like the weekend of some, I don't remember the date, but she asks if she's gonna be in town some weekend. And Emily is like, I don't know, why? And Sookie is like, well, that's when I'm planning Lorelai's wedding shower. And Emily is like, she does the Peppa Pig phone hang-up routine, basically, because she didn't know that Lorelai was getting married. Then she goes and talks to Richard, and she's like, you gotta call Rory up and apologize for treating her boyfriend like crap tonight. And Richard is like, why? He's a peasant boy. He deserves it. And Emily is like, our daughter is getting married, and she didn't tell us. When Rory gets married, I want her to tell us. So, the next week, Lorelai finally tells Richard and Emily that she's engaged and she's getting married. So Lorelai is expecting them to like be super excited, or at least have some reaction, I guess. Emily is still upset about Lorelai not telling her initially. So they just completely brush it off. Emily's like, well, we'll see if we're in town. We'll try to make it. So yeah, then Lorelai goes and complains to Max about her parents like not being supportive about her getting married, or like just not caring at all, basically. And Max is like, he's trying to like assuage her fears and like come up with solutions, basically. But Lorelai is not having it. She's on a roll. She's on her rant. She's not going to stop until this issue is resolved. So basically, her and Max leave dinner, and she's like, "Hey, let's make a little quick little stop before we go home." And where does she drive? But up to Emily and Richard's house, and she walks in with Max Medina, who, keep in mind, has never met these two before, and immediately starts yelling at Emily, and then Emily starts yelling at her, and eventually it's revealed that Sookie called Emily. She already knew she was getting married, and Lorelai didn't tell them. And yeah, Max is just standing there in the doorframe, being super awkward. That's a fun meet the parents if I've ever seen one. So then Lorelai goes and visits the diner to tell Luke that she's getting married, and she's like, well, what do you think, Luke? And Luke, you could say, gives her a very lukewarm response. Oh God, I'm really sorry. Luke is like, yeah, you know, I think it's great. I think it's great you're getting married. I think it's so great that you're getting married. You know, as long as you like know what you're getting into. And Lorelai is like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, we love each other. We're getting married. We're happy. That's what matters. And then Luke immediately starts peppering her with a bunch of questions. Like, are you going to move to Hartford? Are you going to stay in Stars Hollow? Like, you guys have talked about this, right? And Lorelai is like, of course we have. Yeah, we definitely talked about all those things. And we've not been doing this like very extremely spontaneously. We did not get engaged in the middle of a fight. No, what are you talking about? So anyway, Luke is clearly not very supportive. He's clearly very jealous of Lorelai getting married. But to be fair To be fair, I think his questions are warranted. Like, I'm also concerned. I mean, these guys, Lorelai and Max, I think they basically only met up like in real life, in person, like twice. And the rest of it was just like weird, kinky teacher phone sex. So I'm not sure how that's gonna work long term, but hey, you know, whatever works for you. So it's summer break for Rory, and she goes to volunteer one day at some construction site or something. And who does she run into there but Paris? And she's like, Paris, what are you doing here? And Paris is like, what am I doing here? What do you mean? I've been coming to these construction sites since I was in the womb, basically. And Rory's like, why? And Paris is like, why? Because I'm trying to get into Harvard. You know this, girly. Like, I'm trying to like rack up my volunteer hours, my extracurriculars, basically. And Rory is like, extracurricular? What is that? And Paris is like, girl? She's like, you know that like everyone who applies to Harvard already has good grades and great test scores. Like, you need to have like the volunteer hours, the clubs, all the extracurriculars if you want to get into the Ivies. Rory, apparently, Miss Smart Brainiac, I wanted to go to Harvard since I was 4 girly, just had no idea about this. So now she's freaked out and she runs back home and is like, shit, I am about 18 years behind on my extracurricular activities and I'm only 17. So we gotta start volunteering at every single place ever. Like, I'm booked and busy for the rest of the summer. Nobody try to contact me. Like, girly, my schedule is booked. But who does try to contact her? Dean, of course. And he's like, Rory, I'm your boyfriend. You have to be spending all your time with me. Anyway, yeah, Dean is mad that instead of Rory spending like literally every single minute of her days on him, she is instead trying to get into Harvard, and he gets basically super jealous of Harvard. So then Lorelai and Max and Rory and Dean like all go on a double date around Stars Hollow together. Speaking of these two like not being prepared for marriage, Max is somehow shocked by the amount of food that the Gilmore Girlies are eating and all their little quirky pop culture references. And it's like, these are the like 2 primary personality traits, bestie. Like, how are you getting married to this girl and not know that? Like, why does this man, Dean of all people, has to be the one to tell you this? Like, it's embarrassing, bestie. It's embarrassing for you. So then they all get home and Rory and Dean are like, oh, we're gonna go out on our own now and we'll be back a little bit later or something, basically. And Max is like asking Lorelai, like, is that okay? Like, can we just let Rory do that? And Lorelai's like, yeah. And then Max Medina is like, okay then, well, what role am I gonna play in Rory's life then, now that we're getting married? Lorelai's like, well, Rory's raised, basically. Like, you don't need to be her daddy. She's fine. She's already grown, which I'd have to disagree with, but that's what she says. So Lorelai is like, you can be her pal, I guess. And Max is like, okay. He's clearly a little bit offended by that. But to be fair, that is the same role that she offered Christopher, who's Rory's like actual biological father. So maybe he should be taking that, bestie. But anyway, basically the cracks are starting to show with Max and Lorelai, but we're just gonna ignore that for now because now it's time for Lorelai's bachelorette party. So she and Rory and Sookie all go to this drag club, and who is sitting there but Emily Gilmore, because of course she is. Apparently Michelle invited her because these two get along. But anyway, Emily is there and she starts sharing a story about how when she was engaged to Richard, she was super nervous during the weeks leading up to it, and she would go into her room and like try on her wedding dress every night because she like couldn't wait to walk down the aisle in it or whatever. I'm not telling the story very well, but basically it's like a super romantic story and it gets everyone in a very lovey-dovey mood. So they all go off and like call their boyfriends, loved ones, whatever. Rory goes in texting, Sookie calls Jackson or whatever. And then Lorelai goes off, and who does she call? Christopher. Yes, she calls Christopher, and Christopher is like, it's loud there. Where are you? And Lorelai is like, oh, I'm at a bachelorette party. And he's like, oh, who's getting married? And she's like, me. So apparently Christopher did not know she was getting married, which is interesting. And then she's like, can you see me married, Christopher? He's like, yeah, I can see you married. I can definitely see you married, if it's to the right person and all. So then after her bachelorette party, Lorelai goes back home, and who is waiting on her porch but Luke? And he brings out a huppah that he built her so she can get married under it, which is the sweetest thing. Honestly, it even has like a little wooden goat carved into it. It's so cute. He apologizes to Lorelai for like being negative about the whole getting married thing, and he's like, yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great to find someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with. So then the next day, Lorelai wakes Rory up at like 6 in the morning and is like, all right, pack your bags, Rory. We're going on a girls trip. We're going on a little road trip. And Rory is like, girl, what? Are you out of your mind? We cannot go on a road trip. You're getting married. And Lorelai is like, no, I'm not. So yeah, that is the end of Lorelai and Max right there. We have zero closure with him, and then these two girlies just go on a road trip to Harvard. So yeah, now that Max and Lorelai are officially donezo, I feel like it's time to update pro-con board for Max. First of all, I will add a pro in that he is like seemingly stable, at least like financially stable. He seems to have his life together, have a good job, which we can't say for all the men on this board. So second pro for Max Medina, Mr. Max Medina over here, is that he is smarty pants. He's intellectual, academic, reads books. I don't know. That's a plus for some people. Anyway, I think we've said enough good things about Max Medina, so now let's get into the cons. So first of all, he is Rory's teacher, which is fine in and of itself, I suppose, but makes his relationship with Lorelai, her mother, kind of super inappropriate. So yeah, kind of a questionable decision on his part. Second con is that he's just way too like touchy-feely. I don't know if I mentioned this when I was talking about season 1, especially when they're at the beginning of their relationship, not really dating yet, to like grab her by the arm when they're in public and stuff. I don't know. I get it's not a big deal, I suppose. It just it weirds me out a little bit. Like 6 feet, please. Social distancing. Next con for Mr. Max Medina over here is that he gets engaged in order to stop a fight, which is the beginning of any healthy marriage, I assume. Next con is that he has to learn about like basic aspects of the Gilmore Girlies' personalities from Dean, of all people. From Dean, who is Rory's inept teenager boyfriend. Max Medina is the grown adult man who is literally getting married to Lorelai, and yet he doesn't know the fundamental 101 basics of how they live their life. It's embarrassing. Getting lessons from a teenager. Come on, bro. You're supposed to be the teacher. Last con for Max Medina is that I just feel like he's not really compatible with Lorelai. Their personalities really don't seem to mesh. Like, it becomes clearly evident that they're not prepared at all to be in each other's lives in a permanent way that marriage entails, basically. Anyway, I'm done talking about Max Medina now, but I do have 2 other entries to put on the board at this moment. So first one is for Dean. Like I mentioned earlier, he is jealous of Harvard, and it's not just that he's jealous of Harvard, but that he's jealous of pretty much anyone or anything else in Rory's life that takes any of her attention and time away from him. He like throws a complete and total fit about. And then also, like I mentioned, pro for Luke is that he builds Lorelai a huppah for her wedding with Max, which is just the sweetest thing. I mean, it's very tropey, him, the unrequited friends to lovers guy, like supporting her getting married to another man, whatever. I don't know. I love tropes. It's very cute, very sweet. Going on the pros list. So Lorelai and Rory's little girls trip to Harvard is over now, and now they're back in Stars Hollow, and Lorelai is at Luke's diner. She sees Luke get on the phone with someone, and he seems like pretty angry, and he hangs up the phone and is like, fine, whatever. And Lorelai goes up to him, and she's like, who is that just now on the phone? And he's like, that was my sister, Liz. Apparently her son, Jess, is like having some problems, getting into a lot of trouble back home, and she doesn't want to deal with him anymore, basically. So she's just sending him over to live with me. And Lorelai is like, what? She's just sending him over? Like, you sure you can handle that, Luke? He's like, of course I can handle it. I bought some Frosted Flakes earlier today. Like, I'm all prepared. Because Luke, as we'll see, is like super family oriented. Jess arrives on the bus to Stars Hollow, and he is very like brooding, leather jacket, bad boy, Holden Caulfield vibes, and immediately is disgusted by all, you know, the quirky, small town, cutesy charm of Stars Hollow. Lorelai, despite being like skeptical of like Luke's ability to handle this earlier, you know, she's trying to kind of make up to Luke and be welcoming to Jess. She invites him and Luke to come over to their house. Jess gets there. He is really not feeling it. He doesn't want to talk to anyone. He like tries to sneak out on the porch, out with a beer. But Lorelai spots him, and she tries to kind of confront him about it, but she's trying to play the cool mom card with him, basically. And Jess is completely unimpressed by her. He's like, nope. Think I'll just dip. And Lorelai is offended by this, first of all, because, you know, he's being rude. But I think she's mostly offended because I think Lorelai is pretty much used to everyone being like instantly charmed by her, and Jess is not. And I think she's a little bit pissed about that. Anyway, who Jess is instantly charmed by is, of course, Rory. He goes into her room, sees that she has like one bookshelf, and is like, oh, she reads. She's not like other girls. She's not like other girlies. She's for me. Him and Rory have like a little chat, and he like borrows one of her books and writes notes in the margins, which I think this is supposed to be like a cute little romantic moment. But to me, I don't know. This seems annoying to me. Like if someone just like stole one of my books and then I got it back with their like shitty opinions like plastered all over it. Like I don't want that, bestie. So Rory is back at Chilton, and she is starting at the school paper, the Franklin, which Paris, if you remember from last season, is the editor of. And if you also remember, at the end of last season, Paris made a declaration to Rory that she was going to become her arch nemesis and make her life on the paper a living hell. So she is trying to like sabotage Rory in any way she can. She's giving her like crappy pieces to write about. Like she makes her write about like repaving the sidewalk in front of the school or something. But then she spots Rory walking down the halls, and Rory has this super awkward run-in with Mr. Max Medina. The old girl boss light bulb lights up atop Paris's head, and she's like, I know what I'm gonna do. Rory, you're assigned to interview Chilton's Teacher of the Year. Who's Chilton's Teacher of the Year? Mr. Medina. Of course it is. But Rory is like really trying to like not lose to Paris, basically. She's not willing back down. So she goes and interviews Max Medina, and it's super awkward. But then she says, you know, off the record, I really wanted you to be my stepfather. And Max Medina is like, ditto, girly. And then that's the last we see of Max Medina for quite a while. So you're coming off the wall. So Lorelai goes and confronts Luke about the whole situation with Jess at the party the other night. And she tells Luke, like, you know, I think this kid is like more trouble than you think. I don't know if you really want to get involved with this, but Luke takes this as an attack on his pride and is like, why do you keep saying this, Lorelai? Of course I can handle this. Jess is family, and he needs family right now. But then later, Luke runs into Jess at the park and basically confronts him. He's like, Jess, you know what? You gotta try harder to like fit in here and get used to life in Stars Hollow and get along with people here. You gotta try harder to get along with Lorelai specifically. And Jess is like, no, I'm not gonna try, basically. And Luke is like, look, dude, I'm trying to help you out here. Like, and Jess is like, you're trying to help me? Like, I didn't ask for your help. I did not ask to come here. I did not ask to get kicked out by my mother. Like, I didn't ask for any of this. I don't want your damn help. And then Luke is like, fine. And then he pushes Jess into a lake. So Richard is in his angsty emo boy era because apparently he's being phased out at work. Like, his company is trying to get him to retire, basically, because they're like, you're a senile old man, get out of here. Anyway, Richard is super mad about it, and he's taking his anger out on Emily. Richard is upset. Emily is upset because Richard is upset and taking it out on her. Rory is upset that everyone is upset and tries to make Emily feel better by deciding to come out as a rich prep school girl. Yes, Rory is going to a debutante ball. Then Rory tells Lorelai that it's traditional for fathers to present their daughters at debutante balls. And Lorelai is like, well, we can ask Christopher, but don't get your hopes up, kid, basically. But they call Christopher, and he's immediately like, sure, I'll come down there for your little debutante ball. Sounds fun. So anyway, Christopher shows up. He's ditched the motorcycle, and he shows up in a Volvo. And Lorelai's like, damn, you got a Volvo? It's a family car, bestie. He's like, yeah, I actually got my life together this time. Got a 9-to-5 stable office job. And Lorelai's like, damn, that's kind of hot, actually. Because Christopher being, like, permanently, like, unstable and a mess all the time has basically been, like, the only thing keeping Lorelai from, like, actually trying to pursue something with him. So now that he does seemingly have his life together, she's like trying to get all up in that. But then she learns that Christopher has a girlfriend as well. Oh well, better luck next time. Anyway, back at Chilton, Headmaster Charleston pulls Rory into his office one day, and Rory is like, what is this about? Did I do something wrong? And Headmaster Charleston is like, me and the school counselor have been like observing you for psychological purposes. And we've noticed that at lunch, you basically just sit by yourself and read a book and, you know, don't talk to anyone. And, you know, what a loser, LMAO. And Rory is like, what the fuck? You've been watching me? And also, like, why do you care? If I want to be introvert, YN, unsociable girly, like, that's my right. And then Headmaster Charleston is like, okay, I guess so. But basically, if you don't show your presence socially at Chilton, like, that could show up in your recommendation letters to Harvard, which this part of the show always confused me. Like, is this actually a thing that they care about? Why does who you sit with at lunch, like, matter to Harvard? But Rory wants to go to Harvard. We know this. So the next day, she just sits down at some random table in an attempt to socialize. And she meets Francie, who's, like, basically the head of the clique at this table she sat down at. And then later that day, Paris confronts her in the hallway. And Paris is like, are you joining the Puffs? And Rory is like, what's a Puff? And she's like, Francie's a Puff. Like, you just sat down at the Puffs table earlier today. Like, how did you get in there? And Rory's like, I still don't know what a Puff is. And Paris basically explains that Puffs are like some secret sorority at Chilton or whatever that's gone back like centuries or something. And her family has always been a member of the Puffs, and Paris really wants to get into the Puffs as well. And then Paris is like, can you get me an in with the Puffs? And Rory is like, well, I don't know, but I'll try. Which, it's actually really nice to do because remember, Paris has been like her arch nemesis trying to sabotage her up to this moment. And then the next day, in the middle of the night, both Rory and Paris are like pulled from their beds to go to some initiation ritual. They're blindfolded and taken into Chilton where they have to like recite this speech and ring a bell 3 times. I think you're joining a cult, besties. Anyway, Rory rings the bell, and who shows up right at that moment but Headmaster Charleston? And he's like, what do you girls think you're doing? You cannot be in my office after hours. Like, you should all be suspended for this. And Rory's like, suspended? What the hell, dude? This was all your fault. You're the one who told me to socialize under the threat of not getting a good recommendation letter for Harvard. And I just sat down at a random table. Next thing I know, I'm in your office at 5 a.m. Joining a cult. And Headmaster Charleston is like, okay, maybe we're a little bit too hasty in your case, Rory. Like, we won't suspend you, and you can go back to being a little shy, awkward YN book girly at lunch. So there you go, kids. Lesson learned. That's what happens when you try to socialize. So Lorelai and Sookie are starting to get serious about their plans on opening their own inn. They want to like really get moving on it. So they go and talk to Fran Weston, who is the owner of like a little bakery in town. And they find out that she owns the Dragonfly Inn, which if you remember is the inn that Lorelai went to visit with Rachel last season. They're like, oh shit, like Fran owns the Dragonfly. Like we want the Dragonfly. But they learn that Fran basically has no plans on selling the Dragonfly while she's still alive. So that's a non-starter for now. Meanwhile, Jess has been acting like a viral YouTube video from 2015 with too many caps lock words in the title and too many red circles in the thumbnail because he has been going around Stars Hollow pulling sick pranks on everybody. And he also puts up police tape and a fake chalk body outline outside of Tozie's Market, which causes Taylor to like call the FBI. Anyway, the town basically immediately figures out that Jess is kind of the only one who do something like this. Taylor basically goes and confronts Luke and is like, Jess has gone way too far this time. You better kick your hooligan nephew out of this town. And Luke is like, no. But Taylor's like, the whole town agrees with me. We voted him off the island. Get him out. Anyway, Luke is like fighting for his life over here, trying to prevent Jess from being eliminated. And Rory sees this whole situation going down and goes and confronts Jess about it and is like, look, I know you don't care about this town, but what you're doing, pulling pranks on everybody, it's only hurting Luke, who has been kind enough to take you in when you had nowhere to go. So if you care about Luke at all, you should deactivate your little prank channel, bestie. And Jess agrees to do so. But I don't think it's because he cares about Luke. I think it's because this girlie asked him to. And then he's like, well, you gotta admit though, it was a sick prank, bro. And Rory's like, yeah, it was a sick prank, bro. So back at Chilton, Rory's Shakespeare class is doing a group project where they have to act out a scene from Romeo and Juliet. And for plot reasons, Rory is in a group with Paris, Madeline, Louise, and Tristan. And also for plot reasons, they all have to practice at Miss Patty's dance studio for some reason. And also for plot reasons, they're doing a scene with a kiss in it. And also for plot reasons, Rory and Tristan are cast as Romeo and Juliet. They have to kiss, basically, in their little school play. So Rory is basically like, I gotta tell Dean basically about my kiss with Tristan. Remember that last year when she went to Madeline's party? So Rory is like, I better tell Dean about this kiss like quickly because as soon as Tristan comes into town, he's gonna start blabbing to Dean about it. So she's about to go break the news about the kiss to Dean, but Lorelai is actually the one who stops her and she's like, you know what, bestie? Maybe don't tell him. Like, things have been going well between you and Dean lately. And how do you think he'll react if you tell him that you kissed another guy like the night after you broke up? Like, is it really worth it for you to get Dean super angry about this? I mean, if you feel like if you're discouraging your daughter from telling her boyfriend the truth about something that happened when they were broke up, because you feel he may be irrationally angry about it to the point where it would cause a huge rift in their relationship. You know, maybe that's a red flag, besties. The next day, they're back at Chilton and it's time for them to actually perform the play. And then Rory runs into Paris, who is freaking out. And Paris is like, I can't find Tristan anywhere. Rory goes searching for Tristan as well and eventually runs into him in the hallway and is like, come on, Tristan, we're about to go on for a scene. Like, let's go. And he's like, I can't. My dad's shipping me off to boarding school in North Carolina. And Rory's like, right now? And he's like, yeah, right now during our school play. Basically, Chad and Michael Murray had to go and act on One Tree Hill, so they had to find some excuse to get him off this show. Anyway, then Tristan leaves with his father to go to boarding school, and that's the last we see of him. Goodbye, Tristan. So now that Tristan is gone, I feel like we should update the pro-con list for him as well. I don't really have that much more to say about him because he's kind of very irrelevant, but I guess another con for him is that he does not respect boundaries and refuses to leave Rory and her relationship alone, even though she showed zero interest in him besides the one time they randomly and very, very awkwardly kissed. Anyway, I do have a few other entries for some non-Tristan men to add at this point as well. So first of all, a pro for Luke, like I was talking about. He's a big family man. He's very dedicated, willing to do anything, kind of sacrifice anything for his family, even when they treat him like shit, which is really sweet. Jess, gotta add some entries for him as well. First of all is a con, which, as I mentioned before, is him writing in the margins of Rory's book. Again, this is just me being controversial and inserting my own personal bias into this list to piss y'all off, because I know the Team Jess girlies would put this down as such a big pro or something. Don't get too mad at me yet, Team Jess stans, because I have a pro for him as well, which is that he pisses off Taylor, which, it is a bit funny. It's a bit funny, I'll admit it. So it's Christmas time in Stars Hollow, and the inn is throwing some historically confused event called the Bracebridge Dinner, and basically everyone in town is invited to come. Lorelai even invites Richard and Emily to come. They show up, and Richard, for some reason, is just super happy. He's live, laugh, lovin' life out here, which is surprising considering the fact that the last time we saw him, he was super angsty emo boy, taking all his anger out on Emily, remember? So Richard eventually reveals that the reason he's in such good spirits tonight is that he retired from his job. Anyway, apparently Dean has been white knighting all around town, and he tried to break up a fight between Jess and some other random kid at school, and when he did that, Jess tried to turn the fight on him. So suffice it to say, Dean, not a real big fan of Jess. Meanwhile, the inn brings out these horse-drawn carriages for everyone to ride around town, and Dean's sister really wants to go in the carriage with him or whatever. So that means Rory is left to go on her own. She's like, okay, giddy up horsies, let's go. And who jumps into her moving horse-drawn carriage? Jess. Rory and Jess get to talking, and they bond over how they both love books and smart people things, and they're both music snobs or whatever. Jess is like, Rory, you are smart and you have good taste. So what do you and Dean even talk about? Because Jess basically thinks Dean is small town, dumb corn husk tractor boy, basically. And he's like, Dean, he does not have the culture. He does not have the intellect. He does not have the IQ to be on our level, to understand this higher brainwave discussion we are having right now. Jess and Dean, they got some competition vibes going on. Since he retired, Richard has been basically just hanging around the Gilmore house all day, and he has nothing to do, so he's just basically watching Emily's daily routine and making little comments on it. And Emily is getting so annoyed by this, which is so me-coded. Emily calls up Lorelai and is like, you gotta get this man out of my house immediately. Like, I cannot take anymore. So Lorelai is forced to take Richard to Stars Hollow for a day. Rory shows up from school and Lorelai is like, thank God, take this damn man off my hands. But then who shows up right after Rory? The man who like follows 5 steps behind her everywhere, Dean. Dean comes in and announces that he's finally finished the car. Remember the car he was building for Rory? You know, the car that they went into in season 1 where they had the whole I love you scandal happened. But Richard is there, and remember, Richard and Dean have beef because Dean is poor. Richard is immediately like, no granddaughter of mine is going in a car some teenager built for her, which, you know, it's kind of fair for him to be a little bit skeptical of the car. So he and Dean basically go down to like this car repair shop in town. He makes Dean basically stand there all night while he tries to make the owner of the shop find something wrong with the car. But eventually Richard does have to concede that the car that Dean made for Rory is safe, it's fine. And he has to like accept the fact that Dean is dating his granddaughter, kind of no matter what he says. So it's time for the Bit a Basket Festival in Stars Hollow, which is another one of their like quirky little small town cutesy aesthetic festivities. This one is like some semi-misogynistic traditionalist event where all the women of the town have to like bake a basket of food, and then all the men of the town like go to like an auction to bid on their that's why it's called Bid a Basket. It's kind of self-explanatory. The Gilmore Girlies are packing their baskets full of stale Pop-Tarts and Slim Jims. Lane is also going to the Bid a Basket Festival, and she's cooked up some scheme where she is planning to meet with Henry Cho at the festival. They're gonna like do some subterfuge like CIA level plan where they like switch out baskets, and then Henry pulls up into a car and picks up Lane when he calls her at some specific phone booth or something. Anyway, we go to the Bid a Basket Festival. Rory is of course planning to have Dean bid on her basket, but who shows up to the festival to outbid Dean for Rory's basket? Jess, of course. We already know Dean is jealous and feels threatened by Jess, and he's super mad that Jess outbid him for the basket. And then he's like, no, come on, Rory, let's go. And then Jess is like, excuse me, no, you can't go. I bought Rory's basket, and rules of this little event is that if you buy the basket that the basket maker makes, that means you get to eat lunch with the basket maker. Dean is like, whatever, come on, Rory, let's go. And Rory's like, no, I gotta go with Jess. And Tina's like, what? No, you don't. And Rory's like, yeah, I do. It's tradition. It's the rules of the festival, Dean. You gotta respect the rules of tradition. So anyway, Dean is like, kind of rightly feels super slighted by this, but Rory and Jess go off to eat the basket together. Meanwhile, back in Lane's little storyline, she's been waiting at the payphone for like an hour for Henry to call her. And eventually she realizes that the payphone is broken. So she runs home immediately, calls Henry, and is like, oh shit, just realized the payphone is broken. Like, we can still make this plan work. Why don't you come over now? And Henry is like, maybe too late for that. And Lane is like, why? And he's like, well, I realized that there was a problem with the payphone, so I just went ahead and called your house. And Mrs. Kim answered, and she didn't seem so happy that a boy was calling for you. And Lane is like, oh shit, it's okay, we can still make this work. We can lie, we can say you're like a spam caller or whatever. And then Henry's like, I don't know, Lane, like this whole thing seems really complicated. Like, I want to be able to actually take you out and like not have to hide from your mom. And then Lane is like, well, I mean, I'll get around to telling her eventually. And then Henry's like, well, I already asked another girl to the prom. So that's the end of Henry and Lane. The love story that never was. So Rory and Jess go and decide to eat their little basket by the lake where Luke pushed Jess in a couple episodes ago. Clearly, they get along. We learn that Rory likes Ayn Rand, which I truly don't know what to say to that. Also in this episode, I feel like it's important to mention that Sookie and Jackson get engaged. So Rory is doing some debate thing at Chilton, and Christopher, along with new girlfriend Sherry, decide to come into town to see it. Christopher and Sherry come over to Lorelai's house, and Sherry kind of makes it clear that she wants to get to know Rory and like sort of be a part of her life, but not a part of Lorelai's life. She makes it very clear she does not want to get to know Lorelai. So Sherry and Rory go out to spend the night together, basically. So then Lorelai brings Christopher instead as a substitute for Friday night dinner. As soon as they get there and Emily learns that Rory is out with Christopher's girlfriend Sherry, Emily gets like really upset by this. She basically thinks Sherry is some like evil fairy tale stepmother trying to steal Rory away. And basically, as we know, both her and Richard really want Lorelai and Christopher together. So any presence of another woman in Christopher's life is immediately threatening to them. And Emily is like, I just can't believe that he finally got his life together and it was for this girl, wasn't for you. And Lorelai's like, who cares? You're crazy. But, you know, secretly, we know she's a little bit upset about that too. So Emily kind of basically tricks Lorelai into going away on a weekend spa trip with her. So that means that Rory is going to have the house to herself over the weekend, and she is super excited because she never gets the house to herself. So she has big plans to do laundry and order in Indian food, which is honestly so me-coded. Like, why are those literally my plans for tonight? She tells Dean this basically, that she's planning to spend the night by herself, so he shouldn't come over basically. And Dean is so super offended that Rory wants one night to herself. He's like, fine, I won't come over, but just so you know, I'm a saint. And also, you're spending the rest of the weekend with me. Like, Jesus Christ. Then Lorelai goes out to the spa. Rory's got her laundry all ready. She's all prepped to enjoy her alone time. But of course, that wouldn't make for a very interesting episode, so that's not what happens. First of all, Paris shows up at her door, and apparently she got an A- on her like chemistry quiz or something, which is the worst grade she's ever gotten, which can't say the same for Rory. She's like, I demand that you study with me. And Rory's like, fine, I'll study with you for 1 hour and then you have to leave. So once Paris's study hour is over, Rory's like basically pushing her out the door when who shows up but Jess Mariano. He comes in with like a box of food from Luke's, and he's like, Luke was worried that since your mom was gone, you wouldn't have any food for the night. So he made me bring you over like a care package basically. And Rory's like, fine, put it on the table over there. Jess puts it over on the table, and then he takes his coat off and is like, okay, let's eat now. And Rory's like, why are you eating? He's like, I'm hungry too, and I did all this work of bringing over the food, so you're just not gonna let me eat it? Rory's like, fine, you can stay. And then Paris is like, okay, well, I'll just go then. See you guys later. Now she needs a buffer between her and Jess, basically. So Rory's like, no, it's fine. You can stay. So anyway, Rory, Jess, and Paris all sit down to eat. They're like chatting, talking, having a good time together. We learn that Jess loves Charles Bukowski, which is unsurprising, and I would judge him for that, but considering the fact that we just learned that Rory is a Ayn Rand stand, like, I feel like, you know, I'll let this one slide, okay? Anyway, Rory gets a call, and who is it but Dean, who says he's coming over right now with ice cream, which I thought she told you she didn't want you to come over. Come on, dude. Oh my God. You had one job. Anyway, So Rory is immediately like, oh shit. Considering everything that happened between Jess and Dean, Jess cannot be in the house when Dean shows up. She's like, Jess, you gotta go, bestie. And she basically starts pushing him out the door. And when she finally gets him across the damn threshold, who's on the other side? Dean. So this is gonna be fun. So they get into a huge fight, and you know, to be fair to Dean, it is like pretty extremely clear to everyone that Rory has feelings for Jess that she's in denial about. But anyway, Dean is irrationally angry as always, and they get into a huge fight. Paris is just there, sitting uncomfortably, watching this domestic dispute, and eventually she intervenes, and she's like, it was my fault that Jess came over. I saw him earlier at the diner, and like, I thought he was cute, and I basically asked Rory to invite him over. And for now, Dean buys this and calms down a bit, as calm as he can be for Dean. Anyway, the next day, Rory goes to Luke's diner to thank him for the care package he sent over, and Luke is like, what care package? So Rory is doing a project at Chilton where basically she has to create like a consumer product to put on display or something. And basically they have to like get someone who worked in business to consult on their project. So Rory goes and asks Richard if he'd be willing to like advise on their product. So he does. He goes into Chilton and he has such a good time doing it that he decides he's going to unretire and start his own consulting business. Meanwhile, Dean is being a stage 5 clinger after the whole, Jess coming over to Rory's house incident, and is calling Rory about like 5,000 times a day, which Rory is getting super fed up by. Lorelai, as we know, is the #1 Team Dean stan. She wants Rory to keep dating him and definitely not to start dating Jess. So she gives him a little bit of advice. She's like, you could try like loosening the leash a little bit, like not calling her like 8,000 times a day. Try like maybe like once, and I think she'll come back to you on her own, basically. So Dean takes this advice and he manages to not call Rory for an entire day. Wow, everybody claps for Dean. So anyway, at the end of the day, Lorelai's talking to Rory. She's like, wow, Dean didn't call you all day? Really? Well, you want to go like meet up with him now? And Rory's like, nah, no thanks. Then Lorelai goes back to the house by herself and she sees Dean sitting on the porch looking all dejected. And Dean is like, she likes Jess, doesn't she? And Lorelai's like, no comment. So Luke gets called into the principal's office at Stars Hollow High and basically finds out that Jess is like flunking out of all his classes. The smartest person that Luke knows is Rory, basically. So Luke goes and asks Rory if she'd be willing to tutor Jess. And Rory is like, sure, yeah, I can do that. But Lorelai is like, wait a minute, Luke, you want Rory to spend time with Jess? I don't know about that, bestie. But Luke is like, please, like, Jess really needs help and he needs someone he's gonna listen to. And the only person around here he seems to listen to is Rory. So Rory goes over to the diner to help Jess with his homework, and Jess is just like messing around, like doing anything to try and procrastinate. He's like doing a bunch of cringy magic tricks. And then Rory asks Jess like why he's failing out of school anyway, because she knows that Jess is smart because he wrote in the margins of that one book of hers, remember? But Jess is like, I'm too cool for school or whatever. Then he's like, you know what, Rory, I'll make a deal with you. Why don't we go out and get some ice cream? And then as soon as we get back, I will start working on my homework. So Rory's like, fine, we'll do that. So then they go out, get some ice cream, and they're driving around the car and they're talking. And then they pull up to the diner and Jess is like, well, I can stop here and we can get out and I can do my homework. Or I can turn right and we can keep driving around in circles. And Rory says, turn right. So then Lorelai gets a call from Rory and she's like, Rory, where are you? You didn't come home after the tutoring. Like, what happened? And Rory's like, well, don't freak out. But I'm in the hospital. And Lorelai is like, what? And Rory says, well, me and Jess went out to get ice cream, and then there was a weird like squirrel or rabbit on the road or something, and Jess swerved to try to avoid it. And we got into a little accident where Jess was driving her car, which Rory's car is the one that her boyfriend Dean built for her. Remember? So Jess crashed Dean's car. Rory's sitting in the hospital with a broken arm, and Lorelai is completely freaking out. She runs immediately to the diner and goes and confronts Luke. And she is like, where the fuck is Jess? I need to speak to him right now. And Luke is like, I don't know. Like, he clearly has no idea what's going on. And then Lorelai is like, well, my daughter is sitting in the hospital with a broken arm. And then Luke asks, well, is Jess okay? And that one really sets Lorelai off. And she's like, of course Jess is okay. My perfect baby angel child is hurt, and he's the one who did the hurting. He needs to be punished. And why the hell did you even let him into this town in the first place, Luke? He is the devil reincarnated. He is the demon spawn. And how could you let him infiltrate my daughter's life? And Luke is like, oh my God, shut up for a second. You know I care about Rory like more than anything. But I don't know where Jess is. I don't know if he's hurt or not, and he's my nephew, so I gotta go find him and check on him. And Lorelai is like, fine, and then she storms off. And then Luke finally finds Jess out at his favorite lake where, you know, he got dunked in. Luke talks to Jess. We don't really know what happens in their conversation, but we get a sense that he kind of kicks him out because the next day, Jess is on the bus leaving town. So the next day, Lorelai and Luke are not speaking after their fight. Lorelai calls Christopher to come in and stay with them in Stars Hollow. Rory is like super upset and angsty because everyone around town is like solely blaming Jess for the car accident because, you know, Rory is their golden child who can do no wrong. But as we know from last season, Rory does not like to be overprotected, and she really just doesn't want everyone to blame Jess, basically, because she likes Jess. So she goes and talks to Luke because she feels like, you know, he's kind of the only one who understands her at the moment. She's like, I just wanted you to know, like, it wasn't Jess's fault. And he's like, I know. So meanwhile, a new music store is opening up in Stars Hollow, which Lane is really excited about. So she goes in and sees a drum set that she really wants to play, but knows that her mom would never let that happen. So she goes and talks to the store owner, who agrees to let her come in after hours and like practice on the drum set, basically. Meanwhile, back at Chilton, Paris is running for student body president, but Madeline and Louise tell her she's like polling low, basically, because people think she's competent and could make the best decisions, but they don't find her very likable. So Paris is like, who can I get on my team that the students don't feel threatened by? Rory. Paris basically convinces Rory to run on her campaign as vice president. So remember all the way back in the first episode of season 1 where I like very briefly mentioned that Lorelai was taking a business class in Hartford? Well, apparently she's been like working towards a business degree, and finally she is about to graduate from business school. And Rory is like, all right, so what are we doing for the ceremony then? And Lorelai is like, well, I wasn't really planning to do anything. You know, it's just community college. It's not a big deal or anything. And Rory's like, of course it's a big deal. We got to celebrate. And Lorelai's like, all right, fine. I mean, I guess we can like invite Sookie and Jackson and you can come. And yeah, that's basically it. And Rory's like, well, what about your parents, Richard and Emily? Don't you want them to come? And Laurel's like, no. They don't want to see this. They wanted to see me graduate from high school and go to like a real like 4-year college. This one will just cause them to be more disappointed in me. Rory, of course, can't not meddle in the relationship between her mother and her grandparents. So of course, she goes to Richard and Emily behind her mom's back and invites them to the graduation ceremony. Then when Rory gets home, she gets a call from Jess, and Rory is like, oh, hey, like, where are you? And Jess is like, I'm back in New York. I've been, just walking around Washington Square Park, reading. And Rory's like, cool. And yeah, that's basically how their conversation goes. Anyway, the next day, Rory is going to Chilton, and she walks right up to the doors, and then she turns around and gets straight on the next bus to New York City, and immediately, very conveniently, walks right up to the bench where Jess is reading. Meanwhile, Lorelai has arrived at the college and is prepping for the graduation ceremony, and then who does she spot? But her mother bossing around some cameraman. So yes, apparently Emily and Richard have shown up for Lorelai's graduation along with an entire film crew. And then everyone at Lorelai's college starts making fun of her for being like super privileged, rich girly, and Lorelai's super embarrassed. But it's a sweet moment. Like, Richard and Emily are clearly proud of Lorelai and trying to show their support in their own, wealth hoarding, may I speak to your manager kind of way. Meanwhile, Rory is back in New York, just chatting it up with Jess, whiling away the day. And eventually she's like, oh shit, I gotta go to my mom's graduation. So she gets on the bus, but apparently there's been like a big accident on the Beltway or something. So buses are super delayed and Rory is running late. Then Lorelai walks down is it the aisle? No, that's a wedding. What is it at graduation ceremonies? She walks down the stage. She gets her diploma, she graduates, she scans the audience, and Sookie and Jackson and Emily and Richard are all there being super happy for her. But there was one thing missing. Rory. And then Lorelai goes home and she sees Rory waiting on the front porch, and she's like, what the hell, Rory? Why didn't you show up to my graduation ceremony? Like, you were the only reason I did this thing in the first place. And Rory's like, I'm really sorry. Like, the buses were running super late. And Lorelai's like, the buses from Chilton? And Rory's like, the bus is from New York? And Lorelai's like, bestie, why were you in New York? And Rory's like, I don't know. It was stupid. I made stupid decision. I don't even know why I went. Lorelai's like, well, did you go to see Jess? And Rory's like, no, I didn't go to see Jess because that's crazy. That's like clinically insane. Like, why would I go to New York to see Jess? And Lorelai's like, you'd go to New York to see Jess because you like Jess. And Rory's like, what? Like Jess? What are you even talking about? And Lorelai's like, okay, sure, whatever, girly, you don't like Jess. So meanwhile, Sookie and Jackson are getting ready for their wedding, and they ask Lorelai and Rory to be bridesmaids, which of course they agreed to. Christopher's been basically just hanging around Stars Hollow ever since Rory broke her arm and going to like a bunch of town events with Lorelai and Rory. They go to see the amazing, incredible, acclaimed Academy Award winning short film, A Film by Kirk, which, can you even call yourself a film buff if you don't know A Film by Kirk? Checkmate Film Bros. And Lorelai is like, hey Christopher, like, can you be here? Don't you have a job to get back to? And Christopher's like, it's okay. I took time off. And Lorelai's like, well, don't you have a girlfriend to get back to? And Christopher is like, about that. Yeah, I don't think things are really gonna work out with us. And Lorelai's like, well shit, now's my chance. So then Lorelai and Chris hook up, and Lorelai's like, you know what, Chris, you're available and have your life together at the same time for like the first time in my life. So let's try and make this work. Like, let's try to have an actual relationship. And they tell Rory that they're getting together, and they are planning to tell Richard and Emily at Sookie's wedding as well. So anyway, now it is the day of Sookie's wedding. Luke goes back to his apartment, and who is sitting there waiting for him but Jess. And Luke is like, hey, Jess, haven't seen you in a while. What are you doing here? Jess asks if he can come back, basically, and stay with Luke. And Luke is like, okay, sure, you can come back and stay with me, but on 2 conditions, which is that you have to go to school and you have to graduate. And just like, okay, cool, sure, I'll do that, fine. Back at Sookie's wedding, Lorelai and Rory are having a grand old time. Rory is waiting for the results of the school election. Basically, if they win the election, that means they have to do an internship in DC over the summer. And then Lorelai and Christopher run into Richard and Emily at the wedding, and as promised, they're like, guys, you're what you've wished for since the day we got pregnant at 16 is coming true. We're getting together. And Richard and Emily are like super happy. All their white picket fence dreams are coming true. Then Rory walks off. She goes in a little stroll around the grounds of the inn. And who does she see but Jess? And she's like, you're back. And he's like, I'm back. And then Rory kisses him. And then she runs away, which she's wont to do after kissing someone, as we know. Lorelai and Christopher are also taking a stroll around the inn grounds and talking about like their plans for their relationship or whatever, when Christopher gets a call and goes off. And when he comes back, he's like, Lorelai, I gotta go. Lorelai's like, what do you mean you gotta go? The wedding's about to start. And Christopher's like, I gotta go back to Boston and I gotta talk to Sherry. Lorelai is like, what the hell, dude? Like, we just had a whole conversation about how it was over with Sherry and how we're gonna like seriously get into a relationship this time, and now you're just bailing at the first chance. And then Christopher says, Lorelai, Sherry's pregnant. And now it's finally time for Sookie to walk down the aisle. Lorelai and Rory are standing there with their little bouquets looking super awkward, and Rory gets a call from Paris. Apparently they won the election and she's gonna be in DC over the summer. And yep, that's the end of season 2. So now that we're done talking about the plot of season 2, I think we should update the board one more time before we move on to season 3. For Deany boy, for Deany baby, like I talked about, he is like super clingy McClingster over here. He is definitely a stage 5 clinger. Second con for Mr. Dean up here is that he is literally angry all the time. I think anger might be the only emotion that Dean has, besides jealousy, of course, but yeah, it's kind of like genuinely concerning how much he expresses his anger throughout this season, and how much Rory and Lorelai both are scared of him getting angry and lie to try to avoid him getting angry. You know, it's kind of like actually scares me a little bit. So yeah, that's definitely going on the con list. Dean is he's really racking up these red ones here, huh? Anyway, let's talk about Jess now. So I will put down a pro for Jess, which is that he likes books, and Rory also likes books. We see in this season that they bond a lot by talking about books. So yeah, he can get a point for that, sure. And then for con for Jess, of course, we have to put down the fact that he does magic, because obviously. So yeah, that's the state of the pro-con board now at the end of season 2. Let's get into season 3 now. So like I mentioned earlier, Rory and Paris are in DC for their summer internship. They're just like at Congress or something, and Paris gets asked out by another intern, Jamie, and she's kind of freaking out about it because, you know, Paris is intense about everything and she doesn't have much experience with dating. So she asks Rory for advice. And she's basically like, I just wanted to, like, you know, not be awkward and us to be on the same page and everything, you know, like what you and Dean have. Because they're definitely on the same page. And Rory's definitely not going around kissing other boys at weddings or whatever. So anyway, back in Stars Hollow, Miss Lorelai over here has also been running away from her own feelings. So Lorelai goes to Friday night dinner with the parents, and basically the last time she saw her parents, if you remember, was at Sookie's wedding when she was announcing to them that her and Chris were getting together. And of course, as we know, that did not happen, but she has not told her parents that yet. Because as we know, these two are huge Lorelai and Chris shippers, and as soon as she gets to their house, Emily and Richard are immediately asking her, like, where's Chris? When's the wedding? Basically. And Lorelai is like, about that. And then realization dawns on these two, and they're like, oh, okay. You two aren't together anymore. God damn it, Lorelai. What'd you do to mess it up this time? And Lorelai's like, excuse me, I didn't do anything to mess it up. Chris's girlfriend, Sherry, got pregnant. And then Emily's like, okay, so what? So yeah, Emily basically wants Lorelai to like go after Chris and win him back and kick Sherry out in the street, basically. And then Richard is like, no, Christopher is a good man. He would never do that. He's always been there for his family. He's always wanted to be a family man. And Lorelai wouldn't let him. So of course now he's going to be there for this girl or whatever. And then they start arguing. And then Lorelai basically sneaks out the back door as she's wont to do when she goes to Friday night dinners. Where does she go? You know, the only place that she ever goes, Luke's diner. But if you remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, but her and Luke were basically not talking after that whole fight they had about Jess after Rory broke her arm. So it's a big deal that Lorelai is just walking into Luke's diner. So anyway, Lorelai goes into the diner and Luke is like, we're closed. And Lorelai is like, look, I'm sorry, Luke. You don't have to talk to me. I just need some coffee. But then she does that really annoying thing where she says she doesn't want to talk about anything, but then starts like talking to herself, making vague references about all the problems in her life. Then Luke is like, fine, just tell me what's up. And then Lorelai just rants about all her bullshit family problems to Luke. And that's the thing that makes him forgive her about the whole Jess fight, I guess, and they make up. Lorelai basically admits that she hates that her parents are blaming her for like the whole end of the relationship with Christopher, because she admits that she really wanted things to work out with Christopher. And even though she likes to think of herself as like independent girl boss woman who doesn't need no man, she really does want that like white picket fence American dream life with Christopher. So Rory comes back into town from her internship, and Taylor is throwing an end of summer festival in the town square. So Rory and Lorelai go, and it's time to roll out those lazy, hazy, crazy days of delusion, because Rory and Lorelai attend the festival, and what is the first thing that Rory notices? Jess making out with some girl, and immediately is extremely offended by this sight and lets Lorelai know. And Lorelai is like, bestie, why do you even care? Like, how does this affect you? She's like, I know you had a little crush on Jess last year, but I thought that was over. And Rory's like, what? I did not have a crush on Jess. What are you even talking about? And Lorelai is like, okay, girl, whatever you say, but you're clearly very jealous of this girl Jess is making out out with right now, and you also haven't bothered to like call or talk to or see Dean since you came back in town. So that's a little bit, you know, that's suspicious, that's weird, like what's up with that? And Rory finally admits that she kissed Jess at Sookie's wedding. And Lorelai is basically like, girl, you need to make up your damn mind, which is true. And Rory's like, whatever, Mom, you wouldn't understand. But later she talks to Lorelai and she's like, you know what, Mom, you were right. I need to make up my mind, and I have. It's Dean. It's always been Dean. It always will be Dean. I love Dean. He's my boyfriend. He's my Dean. And I don't know what I was even thinking with Jess, but like I'm totally over him, which, okay. We'll see how that works out, girly. We'll see. So sorry that the screen just went black right now. I lost the clip for this portion, but basically what's going on now is that Paris and Rory are back at Chilton and they are heading their first student council meeting of the year. They're just meeting everybody else who's also part of the student government, including Francie, who we've already met. Remember her, Little Miss Puff. And at the end of the meeting, Paris is going around and asking all the other members if they have any like questions, comments, or concerns, basically, if they have anything they'd like to propose that the student council work on. So apparently Francie is in her feminist bag and is out here single-handedly fighting misogynistic school dress codes. And she's like, yeah, Paris, actually, I wanted to propose that we change the school policy to raise the hemline cutoff on our uniform skirts by 1.5 inches. And Paris is like, okay, you know, I know, I don't care about that, basically. Francie is like, okay. Fine then. So then they end the meeting and Rory is walking down the halls when a hand pops out and drags her into the girls' bathroom, where who is there but Francie, who is really determined to get this damn hemline issue passed and is trying to pull some like backdoor bribery stuff. And you can also tell that she is trying just way too hard to girl boss in this scene, and it's not working. Sorry, you'll never be Paris. Like, Francie basically tells Rory that she needs to talk to Paris and get the whole hemline issue passed. Otherwise, Francie will tell Paris that her and Rory were conspiring behind Paris's back, and then Paris will be betrayed and her and Rory will be enemies again. It's kind of convoluted, but you know, politics always are. So slay, girl boss. So then Lorelai and Rory are at yet another weekly FND, and Emily, expert level meddler that she is, she tells Lorelai that she called Christopher earlier in the week and they had a nice little chat, but she basically says that she could tell that he wants Lorelai back. And Lorelai's like, you could tell all that over the phone? Like, what were you even talking about? And then their conversation gets interrupted by somebody bursting into the room. And who is it but the man, the myth, the legend, Christopher himself. And Lorelai is like, what the hell? What are you doing here? You can't just show up here. And then Christopher is like, well, what else was I supposed to do, Lorelai? You weren't returning any of my calls. I don't think it's going to work out with Sherry and like all this. And Lorelai is like, you know, Chris, I really did not feel like speaking with you. Like, I really thought that we were going to get together and this was for once, this thing was actually going to work out. And then it didn't. And that really like upset me. It wasn't your fault, but I could not deal with that. And I did not feel like speaking to you. And then Christopher is like, okay, fine. But what really upsets me is not only have you not called me, but you've kept your daughter from me as well. Like, I haven't spoken to Rory in months. And then Rory walks in and she's like, you know what, Christopher? No, you're wrong. Lorelai was not keeping me from you. I didn't want to talk to you because you promised that you and my mom were going to actually get together and you were going to be in my life. And now you're not. So why don't you go be somebody else's dad? So then Rory runs into Jess at Dosie's Market and they start having an awkward chat. Jess is like, how was your summer? And Rory's like, fine. How was yours? What did you do? And then Jess is like, nothing much. And Rory's like, I can think of something you did. I saw her at the summer festival. And Jess is like, oh yeah, Shane, who's apparently the girl he was making out with. And then little miss, I'm with Dean, I'm over Jess here, is like clearly acting extremely jealous. And Jess is like, why do you care? And then Rory's like, I don't know. We kissed last summer. Do you remember that? Didn't that mean anything to you? And Jess is like, well, bestie, did you try to call me or talk to me like at all after that happened? And Rory's like, no. And Jess is like, and are you still with your boyfriend? You know, remember him, Dean? And Rory's like, yes. And then Jess is like, well then, girly, you got no say in this. Like, I can date whoever I want. So remember when I said that a new music shop opened up in town and Lane was going there to like learn how to play the drums? Well, apparently she's been like practicing drumming all summer, and now she's putting flyers up all over town to like try to find some other musicians so she can start a band. And she does hear back from a guitarist, and this is when we meet our Lord and Savior, our shining light, literally the only worthwhile man on this show, Dave Rogalski. Dave Rogalski, God Among Men, agrees to be part of Lane's band, and he also brings along some of his friends, Zach and Brian, and they start rehearsing. But since they're in Stars Hollow, Lane is afraid that her mom's expert, Christian senses will pick up on the devil's music. So since Lane has to hide her band from her mom, they all have to go and rehearse like basically super quietly at like the middle of the night. And Zach and Brian, but Zach especially, are being extreme crab apples about this whole situation and are basically on strike. Like they're refusing to practice until they can actually like scream the words or whatever. And then Lane is like, well shit, what can I do then? I guess I gotta quit the band because I can't let my mom find out about this. And then Dave runs out after her and is like, wait, no, Lane, you can't quit the band. Nobody wants that, especially me. Oh my God, this man. So then Lane is like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do then. I guess I just have to find a way to tell Mrs. Kim. So then later, Lane goes to Rory and is like, I am so sick and tired of my mom controlling my life. Like, it is time for me to enter my rebel bad bitch era. You know what I gotta do? I gotta make a big, bold statement. I gotta get a new look for my new era. Like, let's go dye my hair. And Rory is like, okay, sure, girl. Let's go do it. She's totally down. So then they go to the beauty supply shop to pick up some purple hair dye. And who is working the counter but Shane? Just a little girlfriend. So then Rory's little pick me, not like other girls chip is activated. And she sees Shane talking on the phone at the counter, presumably to Jess. She goes up to her and is like, excuse me, is that a business call you're having right now? Like, okay, Karen, do you want to speak to our manager? Anyway, then they leave the beauty supply store and Rory starts dyeing Lane's hair, and Lane is talking about how she has a crush on Dave Rogalski, which is so cute. Anyway, Rory finally finishes dyeing Lane's hair, and then we see Lane in this really awful cheap-ass purple wig for about 30 seconds before we hear Mrs. Kim come home, and Lane is like, oh fuck, oh no, what have I done, bestie? Like, she cannot see me with purple hair. And Rory is like, well, it's already dyed. And Lane is like, well, we gotta dye it back then. So then they dye Lane's hair back to black. So the next day, Jess pulls up at Luke's diner with a car. And Luke is like, Jess, whose car is that? And he's like, mine. And Luke is like, did you steal it? And Jess is like, no, I bought it. And Luke is like, bestie, with what money? Like, you work for me. So Jess is being like really vague and clearly trying to hide where he got the money to buy this car from. He's like, I go to a place that pays me for my services. And then Luke is like, Jess, are you a gigolo? And Jess is like, no, I just work at Walmart, bestie. And Luke is like, you work at Walmart? Lol, like that's even more embarrassing. So apparently, since the whole debacle at Friday night dinner, Rory and Christopher have kind of made up. They're like talking again, and Rory gets invited to Sherry's baby shower. Lorelai offers to drive her, but of course, as soon as they get there, Sherry pops up in the car window like a little jack-in-the-box and ropes Lorelai into coming to the baby shower as well. So once they're inside, Sherry pulls Lorelai aside and is like, I just want to thank you for whatever you said to Chris. And Lorelai is like, what are you talking about? Because remember, she hasn't talked to Chris in like months. And then Sherry basically tells her that when she found out she was pregnant, her and Chris were on the outs. They were kind of separated, basically about to call it quits, as we know. And she says that she initially was kind of scared to tell Chris, but eventually got up the nerve to call him during the weekend that he was staying at Lorelai's for Sookie's wedding. But when Chris got the call and came back to Boston, he was immediately like super there for Sherry, super present, wanting to be involved in her life and with the baby. And Sherry was like, so Lorelai, you must have said something to him to make him such a good boyfriend. And once Lorelai hears this kind of spins her down a spiral, because as we know, this was the weekend that her and Christopher were supposed to get together, and instead it just brought him and Sherry closer. And she goes into Sherry's bathroom and starts trying to mess up all the towels and rearrange the toiletries to like get her back or something. And then Rory confronts her and is like, Mom, you can't mess up Sherry's bathroom. Like, that's concerning behavior, bestie. Like, I think we need to take your feelings, your anger out in a more healthy, productive way. So then they go and see a therapist. No, no, just kidding. Of course they don't. Then they go and take the deviled eggs from the baby shower and throw them at Jess's new car. So now it's time to talk about probably my favorite episode of the entire show. So Stars Hollow is hosting a dance marathon, which is like this charity event. Again, they host a lot of town charity events where they're raising money. They're always seemingly raising money for some bridge repair. Anyway, it's a town charity event where they all dress up in these little 1940s costumes and go to the school gym with a partner, and they have to stay dancing for 24 hours. And whoever manages to have both them and their partner stay on the floor dancing the longest wins. So apparently Kirk wins the dance marathon every year, but this year Lorelai is determined to win. She's determined to get like a really good, strong partner with a lot of stamina who can keep going all night, but her partners keep ditching her at the last minute. So eventually she has to ask Rory to come with her, and Rory tries to get out of it by being like, no, sorry, I can't. We have like this really big deadline coming up for the Franklin, and Paris is being like really strict about it, and I think we got to work all weekend. But apparently Jamie, remember the guy Paris went on a date with in DC? He's back in town to see Paris again, and Paris is in a good mood about this. She lets everyone have the weekend off. So now Rory has no excuse not to go to the dance marathon with Lorelai. Anyway, they show up at like 6 a.m. Their cute little vintage outfits. They run into Sookie in the line, who tells them that apparently Jackson wants 4 and 4, which apparently means 4 kids in 4 years. Which, wow, that uterus is going to be tired, girl. So anyway, then Rory and Lorelai get onto the dance floor. They're trying to outshine Kirk. Dean is, of course, there to watch them. And who else is there at 5 a.m. sitting in the front row for the town festivities but Mr. I Hate Small Town Charm, Jess Mariano with Shane, because of course, Rory, Little Miss, I'm over Jess, Jess who, I never heard of him, cannot stop staring at these two and making offhand comments. So anyway, Lane and Mrs. Kim are also there outside the gym serving eggless egg salad sandwiches like the iconic vegan influencers that they are. And who shows up at literally, again, 5 o'clock in the morning to grab one of these sandwiches but Dave Rogalski? This is apparently a really good episode for men waking up at 5 in the morning just so that they can go and see the girl they like. Anyway, back on the dance floor, Lorelai's heel breaks, so she leaves Rory in the care of Dean, and she's like, y'all better keep dancing out here. I can't be losing this thing because of you. And then she runs off and gets Luke to fix her shoe because apparently he's a cobbler now. Anyway, Rory and Dean are out on the dance floor. They got about an hour left in the marathon, and who is still there but Jess? And Rory can't seem to ignore his presence. She just keeps on ranting about how Jess should not be here if he's not participating, and how all he wants to do is just sit there and make out with Shane, and he's ruining the town festivities. And then Rory is not like other girls. Chip gets activated once again, and she decides that she is Queen of Feminism, woke Gloria Steinem, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she decides to turn her rant onto Shane and talk about how Shane is like a detriment to modern day feminism by like making out with Jess or something. Anyway, then Jess's ears perk up and he's like, why don't you just ignore us and pay attention to your boyfriend? And then Dean butts in and says, sorry, she can't, because I'm not her boyfriend anymore. So yeah, Dean breaks up with Rory in the middle of the dance marathon and leaves her standing alone on the stage. So Kirk wins the dance marathon once again and dances all around the gym to the Rocky theme song. So then later that night, Rory and Jess meet up once again at the bridge over the same lake where Luke pushed him in like literally a season ago, which he's obsessed with that lake. And then Jess walks up to Rory and he's like, Dean's a jerk. He shouldn't have broken up with you in front of the whole town. And Rory's like, no, he kind of made some points. Like he was kind of in the right. It's clear that I was kind of dragging him along, and it's clear that we liked each other and probably should not have been in denial of our feelings for so long. That was kind of wrong of me to do to him, which finally she gets it. So then Jess asks if her and Dean are like really officially over, and Rory says yes. And then Jess says that he has to go take care of something then, which is really ominous. And considering the fact that we never see or hear of Shane after this moment, I have to assume that he killed her. Like, I have to assume that her remains are chopped up in some body bag in the woods right now. Like, what do you mean you have to go take care of something then? So now that Rory and Dean are done officially, I feel like it should be time to update the pro-con list for Deany boy over here, but I don't know if I have really anything else to say about him at this point. I feel like I made some points, and I feel like I kind of made all the points I want to make, but I also feel kind of bad that there are so many con entries for him. You know what, Deany baby? I'm feeling in the generous spirit today, and I will add another pro for you. So the pro I'm gonna add for Deany boy up here is that he's buddy old pals with Lorelai. As we know, Lorelai is the #1 Team Dean stan. And also, as we know, Rory and Lorelai are really close, and Rory really values her mom's opinions on the men she is dating. So the fact that she likes Dean is good, I guess. So that's basically it for Dean, but who I really do want to update this pro-con board for is Christopher. So one pro I want to add for Chrissy Boy down here is that he is kind of one of the only people in this show who is able to sort of keep up with Lorelai's wit. Like I said in the beginning, Lorelai is kind of like fast-talking, quick wit, obscure pop culture references girl. And for most people, this like style of talking just kind of goes straight over their head. But I think Chris, you know, the girls who get it, get it. And I think Chris is kind of one of the girls who get it. He tends to understand her references and sort of has the same sense of humor. And I think this sort of similar style of talking, style of communication really makes their scenes together really dynamic and makes them have good chemistry on screen. And then the other pro right now for Christopher is that he is Rory's father, which makes him the very, you know, Norman Rockwell, white picket fence, 1950s American dream ideal for Lorelai, which we know from her conversation with Luke in the diner that she like secretly kind of wants that like, you know, little nuclear family life to work out with Christopher. In terms of cons for Christopher, the first one I'm going to put is that he is just messy. I put down here, Messies in parentheses, am I the drama? Because Christopher is always just showing up places causing drama. Like literally when he just bursts into Friday night dinner and demands to speak with Lorelai. And he's just like constantly doing this throughout the show, showing up unexpected at places and events in Lorelai's life and like just causing big fights and ruining relationships for her. It's extremely messy behavior. And technically, like objectively, this is a bad trait, but I kind of love it. I kind of love how messy he is. You know, I think this pro-con list so far is just kind of basically revealing that I'm secretly a Christopher stan. That's gonna get me in a lot of trouble. I'm sorry. I know, like he's bad. We hate him. Like he's awful, but like he's kind of fun. He's just so messy. I kind of love it. Anyway, okay, fine. We'll add some more cons for Christopher because he does deserve them. So second con is that he really only shows up and is stable or like takes responsibility for anything when it's convenient for him. Like as we know, he's been pretty much absent throughout most of Rory's life. Last con for Chrissy Boy down here is that, you know, it's just always wrong place, wrong time with him and Lorelai. Like they're on the same page with like their sense of humor, their references, their communication style, but like with their actual like life circumstances, they can never seem to get on the same page. And the one moment that they do, Chris ends up getting another woman pregnant. So yeah, that doesn't really work out. So as we all know, Rory is Little Miss Harvard over here, but Richard actually went to Yale. So he secretly kind of wants Rory to go to Yale as well instead of Harvard. He's been planning a little bit of subterfuge to try to get her to go to Yale. So basically he invites all the Gilmore Girlies out to Yale with him under the guise of like some alumni trip meetup thing. But secretly it's because he's set up a meeting for Rory with the admissions officer, which Rory did not know about ahead of time. So he basically surprised all three of the Gilmore Girlies with this news. As you may expect, it doesn't really go well. Lorelai is mad at him because Lorelai is upset about any attempts that her parents make to meddle in Rory's life. Actually, Rory, who's usually super like polite, good manners, you know, accepting of her grandparents meddling, gets mad at Richard too because she wasn't given a chance to prepare for this interview basically, and apparently it went like really awkwardly. So yeah, basically Richard is in the trenches right now. All the Gilmore Girlies are hating him. So now it's time for the Thanksgiving episode. So basically Lorelai has been avoiding her F&D duties ever since the whole, you know, Richard Yale debacle. So basically Emily eventually confronts her in the inn and is like, okay, Lorelai, I know you're mad at us, but you gotta come to Thanksgiving dinner at our house. Like, no excuses. So Lorelai's like, fine. So Lorelai runs into Dean at Dosie's Market, and they have a bit of like an awkward encounter. It's clear that Dean is like kind of trying to avoid her, and Lorelai says, you know, it's okay, Dean. You don't have to avoid me. Just because you and Rory broke up doesn't mean we did. Okay then. Anyway, so the first dinner that Lorelai and Rory attend is the Kim's annual vegan tofurkey extravaganza. And apparently Mrs. Kim has hired a local Christian boy to play some hymns on his guitar for ambiance. Who is the local Christian boy? It's Dave Rogalski, of course. Then Lorelai and Rory stop in at Luke's and at Sookie and Jackson's before heading over to the Gilmores. So over at Richard and Emily's, they have some other guests over for their little Thanksgiving soiree. They're like European or something. Anyway, their guests like start trying to make conversation with Rory by asking her, you know, about college and what schools she applied to. And Lorelai's like, well, my daughter is going to Harvard. And then the guests are like, well, you didn't only apply to Harvard, did you? And Lorelai's like, of course she did. My daughter's going to Harvard. And Rory's like, well, actually, Then Rory reveals that she also applied to Princeton and Yale, which are those her safety schools? Anyway, Lorelai freaks out about this. She gets really mad and she immediately accuses, of course, Richard and Emily of manipulating her and making her apply to Yale against her wishes, even though they completely object to this. They said they had no idea what schools Rory was applying to. And why can't Rory pick schools on her own accord? I don't know. Anyway, Lorelai refuses to believe them because she has to believe that her parents are the puppet masters of all evil in her life. But also, like, did she really think Rory was only gonna apply to one school and that school was gonna be like literally the hardest school to get into in the US? But also, why didn't Rory tell Lorelai that she was applying to, I don't know. This whole situation is very strange to me, but whatever. These two storm out of the F&D, and where do they go? The place they always go after they storm out a Friday night dinner, Luke's Diner. Rory sees Jess taking out the trash, and she starts making out with him while he's holding the trash bags. And who sees this little makeout sesh? Dean. So when Rory goes inside, Dean like pops out of the shadows and goes and confronts Jess. And he's like, oh, just because you have Rory now, you think you're all high and mighty. You think you can just walk around this town like you own it. He's like, remember, Jess, this is my town. Excuse me, Mr. Windy City, didn't you just move here 1 year ago from Chicago? Don't think I don't remember. So it's snowing in Stars Hollow again, which means it is time for the winter carnival. Rory is, of course, super excited about another town event, and she asks Jess to go with her, but he is being all like James Dean leather jacket bad boy vibes and is like, I can't go to your silly town events, Rory. It'll ruin my street cred. And Rory is like, well, you went to silly town events before. You went to the Bit of Basket Festival and the dance marathon. And Jess is like, yeah, well, that's when I was trying to get you. Now I have you, so I don't have to do that anymore. Side note, but I just wanted to mention how at the beginning of this episode, we literally see Rory making out with Jess on pretty much every surface there is to be found in the Greater Stars Hollow area, when she literally called Shane a, and I quote, threat to modern day feminism for doing the same thing like 2 episodes ago. So whatever happened? Whatever happened to the queen of woke feminism for leading the charge against misogyny? What happened to that, Rory? So moving right along from Rory's love life, apparently things are going well with Paris and Jamie. So well, in fact, that she cancels another meeting of the student council. And Francie sees this as her moment to stage a coup. So she holds the meeting in Paris's stead, which Rory is super unhappy about, and basically demands that they put the school funds towards like renting out a fancy mansion for prom instead of buying the school a new telescope like Paris wanted. Is this what being in private school is like? So Lorelai and Sookie are going to the business center to attend a class on like how to run their own inn or something, and there they meet Alex, who is played by pre-Twilight Charlie Swan. He's apparently opening his own coffee shop, so immediately him and Lorelai hit it off, and he asked her out on a coffee tasting date. Meanwhile, back at Chilton Student Council, Francie and Rory are continuing their own little standoff. Rory is still upset about the whole coup that Francie tried to stage and is making a point to turn down every motion that Francie tries to put forward in the student council. So eventually, Francie calls Rory out to like meet her, and Rory is transported into a film noir scene. I mean, not literally. This isn't Pretty Little Liars, okay? But basically, Francie just appears out of the shadows in a parking lot with a lighter. She asks Rory if she's willing to like call a truce on their feud, which Rory agrees to, and then Francie disappears. So anyway, back at Chilton, Francie drags Paris into the bathroom. She really does just love hanging out in that bathroom, doesn't she? But anyway, she like kidnaps Paris and is like, Paris, I have something I need to talk to you about. Like, I'm not sure how to say this, but Rory came to me the other day and said that like she wasn't sure you were able to like effectively perform your duties as student council president because she just said you've been so distracted with your new boyfriend Jamie recently. And Paris is like, what? And Francie's like, yeah, I have proof. Like, she called me out to this parking lot to meet with her. Look at these pictures of us in the parking lot. Later, Rory and Paris go to their fencing class, which who gave Paris a sword? Who thought that was a good idea? Anyway, Paris is being a little aggro with that sword towards Rory, and Rory is like, Paris, like, back off, what's going on? And Paris tells her about the little, bathroom soiree she had with Francie earlier. Rory is like, what? Why would you believe Francie? She's lying. Like, she's the one who wanted to meet up with me. She's the one who wants to sabotage you. And Paris is like, I know, Rory, I'm not stupid. I'm just mad that you told her about Jamie. I didn't tell anyone that I was dating Jamie, so she must have heard from you. This was supposed to be something that was between us, Rory. Like, I thought we were best friends. So, yeah, I think Paris and Rory are broken up now. Also, did I mention that Rory did tell Francie about Jamie in one of their little bathroom conversations? I don't know if I mentioned that. So Lorelai and Rory are letting Lane's band practice in their garage. So that means that they finally have a space to rehearse as loudly as they want. And Lane and Dave can spend more time together. So Lane tells Rory that she has hatched an evil mastermind plan, basically, to get Mrs. Kim to agree to let her go to prom with Dave. Apparently, Mrs. Kim has already agreed to let Lane go to prom if she gets to be the one to choose the boy she goes with. So Lane and Dave are just basically planning to like do what they've already been doing and keep up his little, God-fearing, small town Christian boy shtick who loves playing hymns all day on his guitar. And then Mrs. Kim will end up loving him, and then they can go to prom together, basically. Anyway, Rory and Lane are scheming and dreaming down the Stars Hollow streets, and they walk into the beauty supply store. And who is working the counter now? Kirk. I told y'all, Shane is missing. She was working on the beauty supply store not like 3 episodes ago. Like, where's my Netflix true crime documentary on Shane. Hello. So Lorelai and Alex are on their little date and they're like getting to know each other, and Alex mentions that he loves like camping and fishing, and he asks Lorelai if she likes those things too, and she's like, oh my god, yeah, camping, fishing, like that's so me. I am so nature outdoorsy girl. And Alex is like, oh yeah, that's great then. Well, why don't you come fishing with me this Saturday? So apparently Taylor is renting the building next door to Luke's, which Luke owns, and is planning to turn it into this old-fashioned ice cream and soda shop. And since Taylor needs to do everything the proper, like legal, detail-oriented way, he sends his lawyer, Nicole, over to Luke to get him to sign the leasing agreement, basically. But Luke and Nicole end up really hitting it off, and Luke asked her out on a date. Anyway, back at Chilton, Paris and Rory are back in their arch nemesis era, and they are basically fighting all over the campus, all throughout their student council meetings and their school paper meetings, and eventually Headmaster Charleston calls them into his office, and he's like, I don't see why you crazy kids can't work this out. Basically, he's like, you two need to stop fighting, especially during your like school duties, because it's making you both look pretty irresponsible and bad, and I don't want to have to rescind your very great appraising letters of recommendation I already sent to Harvard for both of you. That kind of gets to Rory, and she's like, you know what, Paris, maybe we should call this off. And Paris is like, nope. So at the diner, Lorelai and Rory have bought a bunch of books on how to fish so that Lorelai can study up for her fishing date. Luke sees this and makes fun of Lorelai, but then he's like, well, you're not going to learn how to fish from reading a book. So the next day, he brings over a kiddie pool to Lorelai's yard filled with fish, and he spends the afternoon teaching her how to fish just so she can go on a date with this random guy. So like I said before, Lane and Dave are doing this whole little thing where he goes over every weekend to play hymns at the Kim house and convince Mrs. Kim that he is this whole good Christian Bible boy. So yeah, that's what they're doing when Mrs. Kim brings someone new into the house, and she's like, Lane, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Young Chu. He's the boy you're going to be going to prom with. So Lane is obviously really upset about this. She goes and confronts her mom and actually admits that she wanted to go to the prom with Dave. And she's like, well, don't you like Dave? Like, he goes to church with us every week. Like, he's clearly very religious and devoted. And then Mrs. Kim just says, well, he's not Korean. So then Dave has a race change. No, I'm just kidding. Not Dave Rogalski Korea Boo era. So Emily finds out that Rory is dating Jess and insists that he come over for Friday night dinner. And as we know, Emily is always gonna get her way. So apparently Richard is out of town on business, and Lorelai is going out of town on some date with Alex. So that means that it's just gonna be Rory, Jess, and Emily at Friday night dinner. But maybe it's actually just gonna be Rory and Emily, because they are sitting in the foyer for a long time, and Jess is just not showing up. Rory keeps apologizing to her grandmother, and then after that, Jess eventually shows up with a huge black eye, and Rory is like, bestie, what's that on your face? Where'd that come from? And Jess is refusing to answer her, but Rory keeps insisting that he tell her where he got the black eye from, and eventually she asks if he got in a fight with Dean, and that triggers Jess all the way off, but he won't deny it. So Rory assumes that that is in fact what happened, and Jess is super angry about this conversation existing at all, and eventually he just storms out and leaves Rory and Emily to finish their dinner alone. Then Jess storms off back to the diner, where of course Luke also sees that he has a black eye and corners him in the back room and demands to know where he got it from. And Jess eventually admits that he got attacked by a swan. And then he heads out of the diner with a ladle. presumably to go whack the swan back, I guess. Then Luke and Jess have like a little father-son emotional bonding chat where Luke gives relationship advice that he might be a little bit unqualified to give, but in this case it's true. He tells Jess that if he wants to date Rory, basically he's gonna have to date like her whole family as well. Rory comes as the full package, and she's bringing all the people in her life along with her who Jess has to impress. So Jess is like, okay, fine, whatever. So he goes and apologizes to Rory and says he'll make more of an effort in the future, which will, okay. We'll see about that, bestie. So meanwhile, Elaine and Dave are still trying to make their little subterfuge prom date plan work, even though, you know, the Young Chu wrench has been thrown into the works. So Mrs. Kim is making her go on dates with Young Chu. Basically, Young Chu also has a girlfriend that he's secretly dating. So their plan is that Lane and Young Chu are gonna go on a couple dates, and then Young Chu is gonna break up with her. And then that'll leave Dave as the only prom available option. Meanwhile, back in Rory's relationship, Jess is putting in almost no effort at all, despite what he said last time. Basically, he's been telling Rory, like, oh, he'll just call her later to make plans, or they can meet up, like, whenever. Since Rory is Miss Organized List scheduled planner girl, she's getting kind of pissed by this, because she's just sitting around at home all night waiting for Jess to call, and he never does. So Lorelai eventually has to force her out of the house, and she agrees to go to a hockey game with Lane and Young Chu. And then just as she does, who shows up at the door but Jess, who Lorelai is extremely pissed at now. And she's like, maybe you should go apologize to Rory. And Jess, of course, has no freaking clue why he should do that. And then Lorelai basically tells him that if he wants Rory to continue to date him, he has to take some initiative and be the one to make plans for them. He's like, fine, whatever. Like, literally, why does every person in Stars Hollow have to teach this man how to put in the bare minimum effort for Rory? It's embarrassing, honestly. So Rory and Lane are at the hockey game. They see Dean there because he plays hockey, because of course he does. And they also see somebody else who is there to see Dean, which is apparently his new girlfriend, Lindsay. Lane is there with Young Chu, per Mrs. Kim's instructions, who is just on the phone with his secret girlfriend the entire time. And Dave is back at the Kim house playing even more hymns, but he saw Young Chu pick Lane up to go on their hockey game date, and he's clearly feeling a little bit jealous about it. So when Mrs. Kim gives him a 15-minute break, he leaves the house and sprints a mile over to the gym where they're having the hockey game, just so he can see how Lane is doing on her fake date. Rory is still pissed about Jess, you know, never calling her, never making plans for them to do things. But then when she leaves the hockey game, who does she see sitting outside but Jess, who apparently has bought 2 tickets for a concert for them to go to. So yeah, look, he made a plan. Wow, wow, Jess, we love the bare minimum. Everybody claps for Jess, claps for the bare minimum. So Chilton is hosting a speech competition for its bicentennial celebration, where the winner of the competition gets to read their speech live on C-SPAN. And Rory and Paris both enter the competition, of course. So Lorelai stops in at a drugstore in Hartford before FND, and who does she run into there? But Max Medina. Max Medina. That's right, kids. Max Medina is back in town, and he's back on my wall if he'll stick. He is back in Hartford for the Chilton Bicentennial celebration. Apparently, he's been teaching a class at Stanford for the past year, which is why he hasn't been around. But yeah, he's like surprisingly chill with Lorelai after the whole, you know, running away the weekend before their wedding thing. So Headmaster Charleston calls both Rory and Paris and tells them that they tied for the win in the speech competition, which means that they will have to combine their speeches and perform them together, which sounds, just peachy to Rory and Paris right now. Paris demands to come over to Rory's house so that they can practice their speech collab that they're doing. And when she gets there, she tells Rory that she slept with Jamie, and she is pressuring Rory to give her an opinion on it because she doesn't know how she feels about it just yet. She also asks Rory if she had sex with Dean or Jess, to which Rory says no, she hasn't. And then Lorelai overhears this discussion of Rory's sex life and responds to this by saying, "I've got the good kid." Like, ew. So the next day, it's the day of the Chilton bicentennial. Rory and Lorelai go to Chilton, and who does Lorelai see there but Max? She goes and confronts Max in the coat closet to try and apologize about the whole, running away from the altar thing that happened. And Max is like, you don't have to apologize, Lorelai. It's okay. I'm over you now. But then they start making out in the coat closet. So apparently that wasn't true. Also, they're just making out in the middle of Rory's school once again. Like, apparently that lesson wasn't learned. And then also, what about Alex? Charlie Swan over here. Whatever happened to him? So Rory's getting a little bit concerned because Paris is running late for their speech. But eventually she does show up in sweatpants, looking super frazzled. Rory tries to pull her aside. That's what's going on. But Paris, she doesn't have time for that. She's ready to go. She's ready to get down to business. So she walks up right on stage, and Rory begins reading off their speech to the C-SPAN cameras. But then when it's Paris's turn to talk, she goes off script. Very off script. So apparently last night, Paris received a letter from the admissions office at Harvard, and apparently she didn't get in. Which, is maybe a little bit upsetting to Paris, considering that she's been working her entire life to get into Harvard, and her entire family for many, many generations have all gone to Harvard. And then she says to the entire Chilton audience and the C-SPAN cameras that she must have not gotten into Harvard because God is smiting her for having sex before marriage. So then after the whole speech thing, Lorelai and Rory go back home and they check the mailbox where they see 3 packages from college admissions offices. And apparently Rory has gotten into Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. So Rory and Lorelai are making pro-con lists for all the 3 schools she got into. And everyone around town is kind of baffled by this. They're like, why are you even bothering? Like, we all know it's going to be Harvard, right? But Lorelai over here, Miss Anti-Yale, my baby's going to Harvard up until this point, actually wants Rory to seriously consider all 3 schools before she makes a decision. So Luke over here is also in proud parent mode because he just found out that Jess got voted Employee of the Month at Walmart. Because remember, Jess works at Walmart. They're hosting a little celebration for Jess for his Employee of the Month win. So Luke drives down to the Walmart corporation. He goes and talks to Jess's boss, and he's like, wow, Jess won Employee of the Month here. That's great. Jess's boss is like, yeah, he's a great worker here. He's always willing to take on people's shifts when they call out, even when he's already worked 40 hours a week. And Luke is like, huh? Wait, what did you just say? How many hours a week? 40? How is that possible? How could he work 40 hours a week when he's, also working for me and going to school? And his manager is like, I don't know, but I think he comes in 40 hours. So Luke mentions to Lorelai about the whole 40-hour work week thing with Jess. And then she goes and asks Rory about it and is like, Luke told me that Jess is working like full-time at Walmart now. Like, is he just doing part-time at school? And Rory's like, no, Luke must be mistaken. Of course, Jess is a senior. He's graduating. Of course he's going full-time at school. Like, he's my boyfriend. He has to be academically inclined. And Lorelai's like, okay, sure, whatever you say, bestie. Then later that night, Lorelai is woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call. And apparently the Independence Inn caught on fire. So she, of course, rushes down there and immediately starts making plans to like get all the guests out and get places for them to stay around town. So Lorelai and Rory basically are kicked out of their house so that they can let the inn guests stay overnight. So Rory goes over to stay at Lane's, and Rory asks like, how's the whole like, yeah, you know, Young Chu Dave fake dating situation going? Like, has Young Chu broken up with you yet? And Lane is like, you know, no, he hasn't. He was supposed to a couple dates ago, but he didn't. And Mrs. Kim keeps setting us up on dates, and you know, he keeps like calling and texting me. He and his secret girlfriend just broke up, so like I think he's a little bit sensitive right now and doesn't want to break up with me for that reason. And Rory is like, oh no, Lane, he likes you. And Lane is like, oh no, he does like me. Anyway, then Jess comes to the window to talk to Rory, and Rory's still got that whole, you know, Walmart thing on her mind. So she asked him if like he's been going to school full time, and he says, I go enough. So whatever that means. Anyway, Lorelai stays over at Luke's for the night, and they talk about his relationship with Nicole. Remember her, Taylor's a lawyer. We find out that Nicole is a little bit jealous of Lorelai, as is, you know, any woman that Luke is dating who has eyes. Later, Lorelai is looking over Rory's college pro-con list, and she goes and talks to Rory and is like, hey Rory, seems like Yale actually has the most pros out of any of these three and the least cons. And she's like, what do you think? Is it gonna be Yale? And Rory is initially hesitant to make a decision that, you know, is not Harvard, where she's been planning to go her entire life. But Lorelai is like, you know, you gotta trust and power the pro-con list, girly. So yeah, Rory decides, and it's official. Rory's going to Yale. So the next day, Lorelai and the gang head down to the Independence Inn to assess the damage done by the fire, and Lorelai is excited to get the place up and running again. But the fire chief tells her that maybe she shouldn't get her hopes up, because then they walk in and the whole place is like completely destroyed. So Lorelai's birthday is coming up, and she is very excited about it. She's a big birthday person. And then Lorelai gets a call from her father to come meet her for lunch. And when she gets there, he reveals that when she was born, he made a real estate investment in her name, and the plot of land that he invested in was finally sold, which means that Lorelai is getting a payout of $75,000. And Lorelai is like, $75,000? Jesus Christ, I can buy 150 pairs of Jimmy Choos with that. So anyway, she's very excited, obviously, to come into a lot of money. Meanwhile, Luke has been kind of suspicious. You know, he's been lurking about trying to like spy on Jess a little bit ever since he heard about the whole 40-hour work week at Walmart thing. And finally, he watches him walking to school, but catches him at the last minute, like dash off to his car and drive to Walmart, which, you know, he's really not being that sneaky about it at all. And also the school is literally right across the street in full view of the diner. Like, how did Luke not notice this before? So Rory and Lorelai go to F&D for Lorelai's birthday dinner, and Lorelai hands them a check for $75,000. Yep, apparently Lorelai decided to use this investment money to pay off the money that her parents loaned her for Chilton. Emily, of course, goes ballistic about this because, you know, she knows that now that her daughter is no longer under a financial obligation to see her, that she will not be coming around anymore. Then Richard and Marie also get extremely upset at Lorelai because, you know, she made Emily upset. And then Lorelai complains to them. She's like, I can't see how I did anything wrong. Like, I paid off a loan. Like I said I was going to do. Like, you're supposed to do. Like, you're financially obligated to do. And then Rory's like, oh my God, time and place. And you did it at my birthday dinner. Well, actually, it's her birthday dinner, but you know, the sentiment still stands. So Rory really wants to go to the Stars Hollow High prom with Jess. So she asks if they can go together. And she's like trying to convince him to go. She's like, you'll have to wear a tux. I know it's geeky, but Jesus Christ, I'm having Dean flashbacks. But Jess agrees that he will go to the prom with her and even that he will pay for their tickets. Hooray for the bare minimum. So Lorelai runs into Max Medina once again at Chilton, and Max is clearly like trying to play it cool, like nothing ever happened between them, which Lorelai has kind of weird mixed feelings about. And she talks to Sookie about this and basically says like she doesn't know what she wants to happen between her and Max, but she feels like she might want something to happen. But you know, technically things aren't over with Alex still. And then Sookie says, are you sure Alex even existed? Which isn't that the question all of us are asking? So Jess goes into Stars Hollow High to try and buy prom tickets, but gets pulled into the principal's outfits instead, and is told that he cannot buy prom tickets because prom tickets are for graduating seniors. And Jess, surprise, surprise, is not graduating because he's missed too many days of school. So Lane's band is throwing a gig at this kid Kyle's house who's throwing a big party while his parents are out of town. Rory is there with Jess, who is like super crabby, angsty, grumpy vibes after, you know, the whole prom ticket debacle. But Mr. Communication over here won't tell Rory why he's in a bad mood. They run into Dean and Lindsay, and Jess makes fun of Lindsay's music taste and is a complete jerk to her for zero reason. He keeps asking Rory if they can just leave, but Rory's like, no, I want to be here to support my friend at her first gig. So why don't you try to just not be such an asshole and go around and like mingle with some people? And Jess is like, I don't want to mingle with anyone, Rory. I don't like anyone but you. So Young Chu is also there, basically stalking Lane at this point, and Dave gets wind of the fact that Young Chu has a little crush on Lane, and he basically goes and tells Lane that, you know, if her and Young Chu aren't gonna break up by this point, like there's no way that him and Lane will be able to go to the prom together. And Lane is obviously super upset by this, so she decides to go and get drunk. So meanwhile, Lorelai goes back to Chilton to talk it out with Max Medina. She goes and confronts him and is like, why have you been giving me the cold shoulder? I think I still have feelings for you. Do you still have feelings for me? Basically. And Max Medina over here is like, you know, obviously I'm still attracted to you, Lorelai. Like, I kissed you in the coat closet a couple episodes ago, but you know, honestly, you kind of had your chance with me and you decided to be a runaway bride and leave me at the altar, basically. So yeah, I think I gotta move on with my life, bestie. Anyway, then Max says that he is going back to California, going back to Stanford, and this might be the last time that Lorelai ever sees him again, which, wow, foreshadowing, because it's the last time my wall is ever gonna see him again either. All right, so now we have to get back to Kyle's party. Oh God. So first of all, Lane is drunk, and drunk Lane decides the best course of action to remedy this whole Young Shoes situation is to call her mom and tell her everything. And yes, I mean quite literally everything, that she is drunk at a party, in a rock band, and also in love with Dave Rogalski. Meanwhile, Jess has run off somewhere, and Rory is looking all over the party for him, and eventually finds him in Kyle's bedroom. Rory asks him, you know, what's up, what's going on, what's wrong, but instead of answering, Jess just starts making out with her. Eventually, they get onto Kyle's bed, and Rory keeps telling him to stop, and Jess is not listening. Eventually, Rory pushes him off, and he does stop and is like, geez, Rory. So Jess has the nerve to get mad at Rory because she didn't have sex with him. So then Rory runs off crying, and she runs into Dean on the stairwell, and Dean asks her what's wrong, but then Jess runs after Rory and sees Dean comforting Rory, and then he's like, ugh, of course, she runs straight into Dean's arms. And then Dean, you know, kind of figures out what happened and punches Jess across the face. Then Dean and Jess get into a fight all over Kyle's house, and eventually the police get called to break it up. So after Kyle's party and the whole fight, Rory and Jess are not talking, and Lane and Mrs. Kim are also not really talking after the whole drunken phone call incident, which Lane is getting pretty suspicious about. Meanwhile, Fran Weston, who is the owner of Weston's Bakery in town, has passed away, and the whole town is gathering for her funeral, and they're all very sad, of course, but if you remember from way back when in season 1, we found out that Fran Weston was the owner of the Dragonfly Inn, which Lorelai and Sookie want to own, of course. So at the funeral, they go up and solicit Fran's lawyer and ask him if she left the Dragonfly to anyone in her will. And he says that no, she didn't. And he is actually putting the Dragonfly on the market to sell it. After the funeral, Dean comes up to Rory and says he has some big news to tell her. And Rory is like, okay, yeah, what's up, bestie? And he tells her that him and Lindsay got engaged, like to be married, engaged. And Rory says, why? And Dean is like, I think you're supposed to say congratulations, bestie. But to be fair, like, I'm also like, what? Aren't y'all 18? Like, I think the why is warranted, maybe. Like, are you Mormon now, Dean? Why are we getting married? So after the funeral, Lane heads back to the Kim house, and she's trying to talk to her mom about, you know, the whole drunken phone call incident when she hears a knock on the door. And who is it but Dave Rogalski in a full suit and tie? He walks in and immediately begins rattling off this prepared speech to Mrs. Kim of a list of reasons of why he's like this good, sensible Christian boy who would never hurt Lane. And then in the end, he says, and I really, really want to take your daughter to the prom. I truly cannot with this scene. Anyway, in response, Mrs. Kim gives him some obscure quote about the Lord. And Dave is like, okay then, bestie, you made some points there. You know, I can work with that. Let me get back to you. And then he leaves, and he's basically like, I'll be back when I figure out what the quote means. So Luke is back working at the diner, and he sees that one of his customers left their wallet on the table. So he grabs it and tries to run after the customer, but they're gone before he can catch up to them. So he looks in the wallet to see if he can find any identification to try and track down the guy, and he does. And who left his wallet at Luke's diner? Jimmy Mariano. That's right. Jess's father. So Luke tracks down Mr. Jimmy over here and confronts him in his hotel room. And he's like, Jimmy, what the fuck are you doing in my town? Basically. And Jimmy's like, I don't know. I just came out here. I just wanted to see Jess, see how he's doing. And Luke is like, no, don't give me that shit. Don't give me that shit. You haven't wanted to see Jess for 18 years. You haven't wanted to see him since me and Liz came home from the hospital and you said you were going out to buy diapers and then you ran off to California. Luke is like, Jess is not doing so hot right now, but he's improving and he needs stability in his life and he does not need to see you. So you better get your ass out of here. But does Jimmy listen to Luke? No, of course he doesn't. Instead, he goes straight back to the diner where he sees Jess, tells him, Jess, I'm your father, and then immediately runs out. So the next day, Dave Rogalski shows up once again at the Kim house in the exact same suit from the day before, and he reveals that he stayed up all night reading the entire Bible just to find the quote that Mrs. Kim said to him yesterday. Mrs. Kim reveals that the quote was not from the Bible, it was from Shakespeare, but she is still impressed by his dedication, which aren't we all? And she finally agrees to let him and Lane go to the prom together. Anyway, meanwhile, back in Jess' world, Jess is mad at Luke because Luke didn't tell him that his father was back in town, and they get into a fight. Jess is basically like, you know, you had no right to do that. It's my life. I make my own decisions on whether I want to see my father or not. And Luke is like, look, man, I'm trying to help you. Like, I'm trying to get you on the right path. I'm trying to get you staying in school and graduating. And then Jess is like, I don't want your help. And also, I'm not graduating. And Luke is like, what? Yeah, no, of course you're graduating high school. We had a deal. Remember last year when you came back at the end of season 2 and wanted to stay here? We made a deal that you would go to school and you would graduate if you wanted to stay in Stars Hollow. And Jess is like, well, bestie, I went to the principal's office and they told me that I missed too many days of school. I'm not graduating. I don't know what to tell you. And Luke is like, well then, you gotta go then. And Jess is like, okay then, bye bestie. So the next day, Rory sees Jess on the bus on her way to Chilton, and she goes over to sit down next to him, and remember, they haven't talked since the whole fight at Kyle's party. And Jess eventually breaks the silence and is like, hey, look, I couldn't get prom tickets for us, so I don't think we're going. And Rory is like, oh, no, it's okay. That's okay. No big deal. Which, no, it's not. It's not okay. Dave Rogalski over here read the entire Bible in one night just so he could go to prom with Lane. Like, try harder, Jess. Then Rory has to leave to go to school, and Jess tells her that he'll talk to her later. But then the camera pans down and we see he's carrying this huge duffel bag with all his stuff in it. So yeah, I don't think Jess is coming back. Anyway, meanwhile, Jess travels across the country to California to meet his father, Jimmy Mariano, the hot dog king. Yeah, basically Jess's father runs a hot dog stand on the boardwalk of some LA beach, but I swear to God they call him the hot dog king at some point in the show, which is really funny to me. Apparently this episode was supposed to be a backdoor pilot for a spin-off that never happened about Jess's life out in California and reconnecting with his father and hot dogs, I guess. But yeah, the show got canceled. It never happened. And if this episode is any indication, I'm kind of glad it never aired because it's kind of boring as hell, actually. So moving back to Stars Hollow, where the actual interesting story is happening, Lorelai gets a letter from Yale telling her that she's apparently been rejected from financial aid. So she calls the office and is like, what's up, bestie? Like, I need the money to send my daughter to school. And the Yale financial aid office is like, no, you don't qualify. And Lorelai's like, how could I possibly not qualify? We are poor poverty girlies over here. And the financial aid office is like, well, we just heard that you recently came into a considerable sum of money. I think $75,000, was it? Karma really is Emily's boyfriend over here. And then Lorelai is going through Rory's Chilton yearbook, and we find out that she has been named valedictorian at Chilton, somehow over Paris, but let's just not think about it too much. So back at the Independence Inn, the prognosis for the place isn't looking very great. It's still very damaged from the fire. Eventually, the owners of the Independence decide the best course forward is just to sell the place off. That means that Lorelai and Sookie are both out of a job. Yay! And they're both like commiserating about this in front of Rory. And Rory's like, well, that's okay, right? Like, it's only for a few months, you know, until you guys can get the dragonfly up and running. And Lorelai's like, kid, I don't think we're gonna be able to buy the dragonfly anytime soon. And Rory is like, what? Why not? And Lorelai's like, well, since I'm out of a job now, like, I kind of don't have the money to swing for the dragonfly. And Rory's like, what? How could that be possible? Like, even though you, like, used Grandpa's money to pay off your loan, like, you still should have enough saved up, right? And Yale is being covered by financial aid, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. And then Lorelai is like, well, about that, bestie. Yeah, Yale's not covered by financial aid. I gotta pay for Yale. And then Rory feels like really bad about this. Obviously, she doesn't want her mom to have to sacrifice her own dreams just so Rory can live out hers. And then Rory's like, well, then I can only think of one other thing I can do to fix this. And Lorelai's like, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about, you better not do that, Rory. I don't want their help with my money troubles. We've been over this many times, Rory. What we've also been over many times is that Rory just can't not get her grandparents involved in her mom's financial affairs. So, of course, she goes over to Richard and Emily behind Lorelai's back and makes a deal with them that if they pay for her Yale tuition, she will continue to go to Friday night dinner every week with them. Because remember, Friday night dinners have been kind of off the table since Lorelai paid off her Chilton loan. So Richard and Emily, of course, like immediately agreed to this. Then after that, it's time for Rory's graduation from Chilton. Lorelai, Richard and Emily, Sookie and Jackson, and Luke all show up to her ceremony. Christopher, Rory's literal father, did not show up to her graduation, so there's that. Rory tells Lorelai that she talked to Richard and Emily and they agreed to pay for Yale. So that means that Lorelai can now go and buy the Dragonfly Inn. And Lorelai predictably gets extremely upset by this and is like, Rory, can't you see they're manipulating you? And Rory's like, bestie, no, they're not. I'm manipulating them. Can't you see this is a win-win-win situation? Like, you get the Dragonfly, I get Yale, they get Friday night dinner, everybody wins. And Lorelai is like, okay, fine then. And once in her God-forsaken life, accepts free money from her parents so that she can improve her life. So she runs off to tell Sookie and they immediately call the guy and buy the Dragonfly Inn. Rory gives a really touching speech at her graduation ceremony and then gets gifted a car from Richard and Emily so that she can make it even faster to their weekly Friday night dinners when she's at Yale. Luke heads off to go on a cruise with Nicole over the summer, and Lorelai and Rory are just about to head home to celebrate when Rory gets a call on her cell phone and she picks it up, but there is no one on the other end. And apparently she's been getting a lot of these creepy phone calls lately, but this time she goes inside the school and actually answers the non-existent voice on the other end and says, Jess, is this you? I think this might be you, so I'm just gonna say this. You really messed this up, Jess. Don't think I'm gonna sit around and pine over you because I am a girl boss independent woman and I'm going to move on with my life. I think I may have loved you, but that's over now, so I'm just gonna move on. Then we transition and it's revealed that it was Jess on the other line, which imagine if it wasn't, imagine if that was just some spam call. That would be embarrassing. Anyway, that is it. That is the end of season 3, and that is the end of my recap for the time being. So, time has come to put our final entries into the pro-con board. First of all, I have a couple to add for Luke. First one is that he just constantly puts up with all of Lorelai's bullshit, like all the times that she goes and offloads her family drama onto him, or, you know, all the times when she decides to provoke him into petty fights. Luke constantly puts up with that and constantly forgives her for that, which, you know, we gotta appreciate a man who can put up with some drama and deal with some level of emotional turbulence. And then the other pro that I want to add for Lukey boy here is that he just honestly performs like an innumerable amount of acts of service for her throughout the show. So I just wanted to put a pro to represent that, you know, all that he does for her, like bringing a kiddie pool to her backyard so that she can learn how to fish for her date with another man, or just constantly fixing up things around her house or making food for her. It's just constant, countless acts of service from Luke over here. So now I think we need to move on to adding some entries for Jess over here. I'll add a pro to... no, it's just gonna fall on the floor. Never mind. No pros for Jess. You suck. So, okay. I'll add a pro for Jess here, which is that, you know, him and Alexis Bledel, who plays Rory, they have really good chemistry together. I think that they actually dated in real life, which makes sense. So, sure, if I give Christopher a point for having chemistry with Lorelai, Jess can get a point for it too. So I think that's enough praise for Jess for now. Now we gotta move on to the cons, bestie. So first of all, I put down that Jess very much occupies this trope of, now I have you, so I don't have to try. Basically feeling like once you get into a relationship with a person, like you've already won the prize or whatever. So now you don't have to put in any effort or do anything for the other person. Which I just think is just not very healthy or great. And then also another trope that Jess very much occupies throughout this season is the trope of like, I don't like anyone aside from you. Like, you're the only person that I like and everyone else I hate and am like super grumpy around and never want to spend time with. I don't know. Like, I know this trope is cute to some people and it's in like 10,000 Wattpad fan fictions, but to me, it's just not. It's not cute. To me, it's a little bit of a red flag, bestie, because it's like, it's usually kind of a gateway drug into like, I don't want you to spend time with anyone else but me. And, you know, like we see with Jess throughout this season, like not liking anyone but Rory leads to him being like really rude and inconsiderate to her family and everyone else in her life and people that really matter to Rory, which, you know, if you actually did really care about her and like her, then you would make an effort with the people in her life, maybe, possibly, just a thought. And then the last con I have to add here to Jess's list is, of course, the scene, just the whole scene in Kyle's bedroom. And I added this one in a bigger font, as you can see, because I think this is the biggest con on this entire board so far. The Jess girlies out there, they love to ignore this scene. They love to pretend that this scene does not exist. This scene comes on their screen and they say, I pretend I do not see it. Suddenly I am blind. Suddenly I cannot see. But I'm not forgetting it, bestie. And I will continue to remind y'all of it until you get it in your heads that this is not okay. I'm just gonna leave it at that because I don't really want to talk about this anymore. So yeah, besties, that's basically it for part 1 of this Gilmore Girls recap. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope you enjoyed this format. I will definitely be continuing this for the following Gilmore Girls seasons. Keep an eye out for those videos, probably coming, well, okay, I was about to say probably coming soon, but considering how long this video took to make, probably not coming soon. Probably coming sometime within the next century, so yeah. Thanks for watching, and thanks for putting up with my annoyingness. Bye!